All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Carey with Church of the Eternal Logos. And tonight, we're going to be talking about the Wild, Wild West, some of the Old West mythology, some important outlaws, lawmen, heroes, villains, all types of stuff today. We're going to be kind of approaching a topic that I am certainly no expert in, but I've spent the last couple of days researching. And I caught a video of a historian that we're going to be checking out. His name is Mark Lee Gardner, and he is an American historian of the Wild West. And I caught some of his discussion, and I thought, man, that is fascinating. Looking at some of the sort of mythologized aspects of the Wild West frontier, the whole manifest destiny, how the Civil War played a crucial role in people expanding westward. And today we're going to be talking about, I got a historical timeline I put together in 19 page. Is it 19? Yeah, 19-page document going over what are some of the unique features of the Wild West. What did they wear? This is partly why I'm wearing denim and a flannel today. I thought, I don't have a cowboy hat, and I certainly don't have any cowboy boots, but we'll be looking at like some of their wardrobe, some of their attire. Why did they wear certain things? Obviously, the Stetson hat, the Stetson, the famous cowboy hat and stuff like that. So we're going to be covering all aspects. It's going to be a general overview, so we're not going to be going super deep. We'll be introducing people like Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Butch Cassidy, figures like this, these important outlaws. But, I figured this topic, it's certainly not related to any sort of Orthodox theology or anything like that. I do have a section in the document where we look a little bit about the religious connection, religious and cultural context of the Wild West. And due to, obviously, the Spanish Civil War in that southwestern part, which is going to be very important. Places like Tombstone, Arizona, the shootout at the OK Corral, that type of stuff. We'll be getting into that. And we'll be listening to Mark in the second half of the stream, really go into detail about some of these figures, separating fact from myth. And I think it's a really fascinating topic. So You know, if anybody's have been in the United States, I know most of the audience is from the US, but if you have ever like gone westward, this was one of the things when I first went to Colorado. I've been to Colorado, Wyoming, Montana. I've been in Arizona, Nevada, California. I've never gone up to Oregon or Washington, so I've never made it that far up the western seaboard there. But one of the things that struck me when I was in Colorado, I was at the Rockies and seeing the telephone lines that go across the mountains and just thinking about the westward expansion, people in horse and buggy, people in traveling these vast distances and trying to settle and create a new life. And it's truly astounding the fact that they were able to travel so far. Now, obviously, there's tragedies. Anybody's familiar with the Donner Party? They get stuck in western Nevada. Snowfall occurs before they were expecting it, and they kind of get stuck. That's where, basically half the group dies. Some people were eaten by the other part of the group. I looking at a little bit at the story before the stream, and at least 2 Native Americans were killed and eaten. So cannibalism did occur. But, for a lot of these settlers, they had to hurry and try to get there before the winter, before it started to snow, because there's just no way to travel. And of course, the disease, we're going to be talking about some of the diseases, Native Americans, raiding people, killing people, scalping people. And so it's a very unique point in American history that really still colors the American psyche, right? You can't really think about Americana without thinking about the American cowboy. And the cowboy himself is a mixture of like Spanish, Native American, and European culture. So I was trying to reflect today about, after doing all the research and putting my document together, about like, what is the legacy of the Wild West? Why is it so important? Because really, when we think about this historical period, one, it really brings to the forefront how recent America really is, right? I don't know if you saw Donald Trump. Obviously, he's already won the presidency in the election, and he's going to do a year-long celebration of America for the 250th anniversary, which is in 2026. And 250 years isn't very long for a country. My wife is German, and I was telling her about the stream and the history, and she was kind of blown away once she started to really think about how recent America is in world history. And when we're talking about the Wild West, I mean, at best, we're talking about the 1840s, basically till the 1890s, and that's being generous. I was looking at some scholars; they kind of point that the Wild West, as it's kind of culturally presented, really isn't until the 1870s. I'm going to say where there's already westward expansion. First of all, Louisiana Purchase, Lewis and Clark, all that stuff exists in the early 19th century. We're talking 1803 to 1805, 1806, stuff like that. And imagine that. Imagine Lewis and Clark making their way across the United States all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and they made contact with, I think, or formed some type of treaties with at least 12 Indian tribes. But the 1840s, and really it's post-Civil War. So the Civil War ends in 1865, and it's slaves, it's Confederate soldiers, it's poor people, basically selling everything they own to try to get an opportunity to go westward and start a new life. And so one of the things I was blown away by is I didn't realize that at one point, 25% of American cowboys were actually African Americans that either fought for the South or the North, and were trying to create a new opportunity out west. But just thinking about the legacy of this brief period at best, it's 60 years. Most people consider the Wild West somewhere around a 40-year window in American history. And yet the legacy withstands. The legacy is sort of essential to American identity. I was reflecting like why exactly that is. Yeah, just after the Mexican. Yeah, exactly. So the Spanish-American War, Mexican-American War is 1848. And so we're already seeing settlers come. We're seeing towns, some boom towns, things like Dodge City, Wichita, Kansas, Tombstone, Arizona. But this short period of history is really fascinating. So I was reflecting on the legacy, and I came with kind of four main points. And why is it still resonating in the American psyche and American culture today? The first one that I thought of is it's sort of, and you'll see this in my show notes, it's the rugged individualism and self-reliance of these people. I mean, I was reading some stories of entire families just putting everything into the wagon, everything they owned, and trying to get, set out in spring and trying to get as far west as they could. And in some periods, especially when it rained or there was mud, I mean, if they were able to move 2 miles to 3 miles in a day, that was considered a victory. And you think about the diseases, you think about the hardships that the people who self-selected to go out here, or not out here, but out in the West, the American West. I mean, these were incredibly self-reliant people. And I think that, good, bad, and ugly about problems with America, post-Enlightenment philosophies, the sort of multiculturalism, the relativism aspects of American culture. But one of the things that I think is positive, certainly, is that this period of history really shapes, and you can see it from the revolution. I mean, I think the revolution and then really this sort of Western period really formed the American psyche and like what is America, and that the American virtues of resourcefulness, not having much and figuring out how to make way, being totally independent. I mean, we're talking about a period in which law really wasn't established. So that's where, you get the whole lawmen versus the outlaw. Vigilantism was very, very common at that point. But being so independent, taking responsibility for one's life. This is, I spent time in Europe, and I think this is one of the big differences between the American psyche and the European psyche is when you look at Europe, obviously there's aspects that are beneficial. For example, my wife is German. So they, if you go to college, you go to university and you make the grades, the state pays for it. The country pays for it, healthcare, all this different stuff. But at the same time, they're taking 50% of your taxes. And just talking with my wife and people that I know that are European, the American motto is having less and less taxes and allow me to do with whatever it is that I want to do with my money. It's kind of rooted in this responsibility, this privileging of freedom over, I mean, how do you want to characterize it? Security. That'd be the best way, I think, to frame it, is that the European mind is much more interested in the security of the state, what the state can offer. They're not thinking about taxes in the same way that the American mind thinks of it, where in America, we'd rather have much, much smaller amount of taxes taken from us and allow us to try to figure out what we're going to do with it, whether it be healthcare. And certainly I'm not advocating for our contemporary healthcare system with the insurance companies and all that different stuff. That's not the point I'm making. I'm making a more general, a more larger abstract point, is that the American psyche is not rooted, somebody says, John and on, in a sort of nanny state understanding of our relationship to the government. And when I was thinking about this rugged individualism and this self-reliant spirit that characterizes the Wild West, the way that I see that still manifesting itself in contemporary American culture is the sort of entrepreneurial spirit. Being an entrepreneur, creating a business, becoming successful, a sort of self-made man. This is really epitomized in the Wild West because that is really what was happening at that point. And so personal liberty and freedom. And also one of the things that I notice is you look at these dime novels and you look at the mythology that spreads around the cowboy. And one of the things that I really took from it, and I really don't know how other cultures or even Europe, generally speaking, relate to this, but it privileges a narrative of the underdog, right? Somebody who succeeds against all odds, because in many regards, whether it be the Mexicans, whether it be the Native Americans, whether it be disease, whether it be the outlaws, there was a lot of things pushing against these people to succeeding in their westward expansion. But part, I would argue, of the American psyche is that we love an underdog. We love somebody who becomes successful against all odds. And I can't help but think that this is kind of tied with this period of history in which we colonize and basically take over the western half of the nation. The Louisiana Purchase is in 1803. And so after we purchased the French territories, obviously Spain and Mexico still had part of the Southwest. That's where we get the Spanish-American War. Once we take that over, now we have all these territories. They're not even states yet. One of the things that's really interesting is it isn't even until the 20th century where Arizona and New Mexico become official states. So in Arizona, the city of Tombstone, this was a boom town. This is where I said the shootout at OK Corral. This is where that happened. It's just part of this general ethos of people going into the frontier, going into the unknown, and having a unique American disposition towards their own destiny. I'm going to take my life into my own hands and I'm going to make it happen. And I think that is something that actually is positive, right? There's a lot of things you could criticize about, things about America from an Orthodox Christian perspective, but I would say that's actually pretty beneficial. Now, individualism run rampant can obviously be problematic. That's where we get the libertarian ethos that, oh no, nobody cares what's going on in your bedroom, although it degrades the social fabric of our country, that we actually do need sort of cultural standards. We can't have this libertine ethos where we just, do and let live. That's not really going to work. So manifest destiny, this idea that Americans were called to go into these new territories, this is exploring the frontiers in a land of opportunity. And this is where this whole American dream really gets cemented in the American culture, the American cultural fabric, and the American psyche, is that the westward expansion really is this idea of the land of opportunity, that you can come here and you can make of it what you will. And this is where I was kind of interested in all these Europeans who came and went westward. So some of you guys have seen the movie like Django, and he's with a German immigrant. And it actually wasn't totally uncommon for somebody, say from Germany, to go there. And then the reasons why they used a German too is that the Germans were very much abolitionists. They were against slavery, and that's where this whole thing where the German, and then you have Jamie Foxx as the slave Django. That does have some bit of historical congruency, although obviously Quentin Tarantino's movies a little bit far-fetched, and it is about killing the white man to some degree. But the other aspect of this legacy of westward expansion, I would argue, is the archetype of the cowboy. What is the cowboy? The cowboy is somebody in the American psyche that symbolizes freedom, symbolizes bravery, symbolizes a connection to nature, right? Within the American context, we don't come from a historical peoples where there's wizards and shamans and all this different stuff, a sort of druidic mythology, maybe if you're Celtic or something like that. But the cowboy, in our 250-year history, the cowboy is a figure that really symbolizes sort of modernity and a connection back to nature, cattle, again, facing difficulties, facing extreme challenges, and then living up to a personal code. This was something that I also found in the research that I found interesting, is that, even though we'll talk about, I got a list of the top 10 misconceptions, even though there were certainly gunfights, maybe not the way that Hollywood presents them. I have not found any evidence based on some of the academic research that people would stand more like the duels of the end of the 18th century or early 19th century, Alexander Hamilton, Andrew Jackson, where you would stand in front of somebody and actually allow them an opportunity to kill you. Even though Hollywood portrays many of these duels in the Wild West that way, it really wasn't. They were out to kill each other before the other person could kill them. So it wasn't like, even at the shootout at the OK Corral, it wasn't like they were standing across from each other just waiting for somebody to grab their gun. No, Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp, they come around the corner. They tell the cowboys that they need to confiscate their guns, because actually another thing that I found out is places like Tombstone or Dodge City or these major boom towns from the cattle drives, that they didn't let people actually have guns inside city limits. So you would come in and most people did have guns, regard to the cattle herders and the cowboys. but they would have to check those guns outside city limits with the sheriff, and they would get them back as soon as they left the city premises. But in the city, to prevent many of the things that Hollywood depicts as the normal state of affairs, actually wasn't. And so they would confiscate their guns. And so at the OK Corral, what it was about, these four cowboys who wouldn't turn in their guns. And so the sheriff, Wyatt Earp's older brother, they come around, they say, we're going to confiscate their guns. They pull them out and they start firing right away. So there is some sort of mythos, but the cowboy, and then the outlaw and the lawman, symbolize this sort of interesting American ambiguity between defiance of the law and justice, right? I think this is something also, again, very different from the German conception, where you follow the orders. I found this with my wife, that they really like to follow the orders, follow the rules, don't break the rules. And in the American psyche, we don't really think that way. And I think the Wild West and the relationship between the outlaw and the lawman kind of symbolize this, because you get people like Jesse James, and the younger group, Robin Trains and stuff like that, and sort of developing of a sort of mythologized reputation as like a Robin Hood, that people can go out in the world and they can sort of perform a sort of vigilante justice against the wealthy. And at the same time, the lawman who comes in and reinstills order into a place of chaos. Both of these things are sort of celebrated in the American psyche. And so the outlaw and the lawman, I think, is kind of unique to our culture, and signifies this sort of moral gray area and the tension between freedom and order, right? Because if the structure of order is oppressing our freedoms, obviously we see, again, related to the contemporary point right now, is free speech and things like this. They want to curtail our free speech. They want to curtail aspects of our freedoms, and that we feel a sense of interior justice, a collective justice in our culture to respond against this. And I mean, you could, I think, in certain ways, even characterize the recent election as a retaliation against this sort of order collapsing of people's freedoms. Meanwhile, the same system, through transgenderism and immigration, is causing internal chaos. The order itself is causing the chaos to curtail our freedoms. And yet, we also want to instill order. I mean, where these frontiers and these places go, they create towns, they create prosperity. And we're going to talk a little bit about the railroads and why the railroads were so important in regards to this period as well. The next point is the mythos of the self-made man. That one of the things that I found is, as I said, many of the people who went west were Confederate soldiers. They were poor people, both north and south. They were slaves. They were immigrants. They were Chinese immigrants. Right. So one of the interesting things about this period is the cultural mixture. Right. So we're talking about European peoples that are inhabiting, you could say, the Midwest to the eastern portion of the country. And they're interacting with Spanish speaking Mexicans. They're interacting with Native Americans. And I was kind of blown away with how many Chinese were already brought here during the mid 19th century. And so the Chinese women were prostitutes and brothels, but many Chinese men helped build the railroad in that regard. So this whole thing is very American, right? Because this is one of the tensions right now in American culture, is like, what is the ethnic racial identity? What is it to be an American? It's really kind of difficult to put your finger on. And unlike Germans, unlike the French, who have a historical place, a historical history and ancestry of people, in America, we don't necessarily have that. And again, it's only 250 years old. So this mythos of the self-made man is something that I found kind of unifies these different groups of people. And I couldn't help but think about Elon Musk and his whole persona, where he wears cowboy boots. I know he moved to Austin, Texas, and he's kind of taken on this Texas persona, but in a way that is kind of indicative of the mythos, the legacy of the Wild West, of this self-made man, somebody who goes into, explores the frontier, and you guys know how much of a critic I am of Elon Musk and his transhumanist agenda, but his space exploration, his, again, for him, the frontier of AI and transhuman, all this stuff is obviously demonic, but I'm just trying to characterize a certain ethos here, is that the narrative of heroism, of exploration and defiance, you can see how in his mind, at least, he's sort of embodying this sort of really central core American value, even in regards to his relationship with Trump and all the everything that's going on in the last 2 years, right? And then the last and the fourth point I would say is, as part of this legacy of the Wild West, is the culture of Americana. Like I said, the Wild West was a cultural crossroads of Europe, of African Americans, of Native Americans, Indians, of Mexicans and Spanish culture, and then Chinese immigrants. And today, this Americana, this culture, the cowboys, the rodeo, the cowboy hat, all these things that are actually a mixture of like Spanish American and Native American culture. It is now like what is Americana. It's central to like American identity and highlights this sort of interesting, I don't like multiculturalism, but this sort of cultural mix that is indicative of American history. And so I would argue those are the four central legacy points that I would take away from my research on today's topic: is the rugged individualism and self-reliance of the people who went westward, the archetype of the cowboy and how that is still important to us as a symbol. And I got a video even showing the Japanese. I had no idea, but there's like a whole cottage industry in Japan in which they wear like traditional Western garb. They do quick draws. They have all the accoutrements of the Wild West, and they have like these little shows and stuff like that. That there's a whole sort of subculture in Japan that loves this brief period in American culture, the American West. And again, that archetype of the cowboy is so interesting because it really does sort of symbolize a person in history that in some regards is unique. Whether you think from the ancient period to the medieval period through the Renaissance, that the American cowboy is a sort of unique archetype. And then the mythos of the self-made man, and then the fourth one is the culture of Americana, this mixture. So we got tons to get into today. Again, we got a few videos I'm going to show. I'm going to show you guys my 19-page document that I put together for today's stream. All that's going to be available at the website for website members. So guys, smash that like. Thank you all for being here. It's going to be a fun stream. I think so. Again, this was a topic. Why did I do this topic? One, I didn't know tons about it. I mean, we're going to be talking about Manifest Destiny and the Louisiana Purchase, all these things you kind of learn. Well, back when primary school actually taught you things, unique things you learn in elementary and middle school about American history. We'll be covering some of that. But then the Outlaws, just looking more into their stories. And I thought this is such an interesting period of American history. And when I was searching YouTube, there's not a whole lot that really kind of gives you a great overview. I did find some good documentaries. So there is plenty of stuff on there, but I haven't seen a lot of interesting discussion on this topic. So I thought this would be a great stream. So smash that like. Want to give a special thank you to First Person Q, who gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships. Thank you so much, First Person Q. Really appreciate that, my man. And very special thank you to the Crucible crew for coming over, and Andrew for rating. I do appreciate that, my brother. And we had $5 sent in over on the Dono chat. Thank you so much. John Anon says, great stream, DPH. Have you looked at the American Orthodox film trailer, which highlights the first Native American Orthodox saint and early Christian saints from California? No, I have not, but I will highlight that YouTube link and put that in. Thank you very much, John Anon. I do appreciate that, my man. Yeah, let me put that in there. Okay. Yeah, I'll check that out. It's a little 2-minute American Orthodox film trailer. I'll check that out. Thank you very much, John Anon, for that. I do appreciate it. And then looks like nothing over on the Streamlabs. I just want to let you all know that if you want to support my work and research, please send in a super chat using Streamlabs or Dono chat. Those take a lot less percentage, but if you prefer to use YouTube, feel free to use YouTube. Would greatly appreciate that. We have a YouTube goal of 20 super chats. So if you would like to help me reach our goal today, again, it does take a lot of time to put everything like these documents together, and I'm about to show you guys. So if you want to show some love for all the work and research, I'd greatly appreciate that through a super chat. Or if you want to gift some COTEL Group memberships, that would also benefit the audience. The chat always loves that, and that benefit me as well. So before we get going too much further, I want to do some quick housekeeping and then get into the document and get in some of these videos. And before we even do the document, we're going to watch an interview with historian, what was his name? Mark Lee Gardner. Very interesting man, knows a lot about this time period, and him answering some important questions about this time period and what it all means. So we're going to be doing that before we even sort of get into the document per se. But if you want to support my work, one of the best things you can do is go over to my website and become a website member. Again, the notes, I got a 19-page notes for today. That is all made available for people for $5 a month. You can copy and paste it into your own Word document and have it for yourself. Keep it for your own research. We have a think tank meeting that's coming up next Wednesday. So if you want to jump into a group of men, Orthodox Christian men all around the world, we talk about the latest things that are happening, be it culture, be it politics, be it religion, anything and everything. And we have a sort of unfiltered conversation. That's for $25 a month. If that's something you'd be interested, please join us. Also, if you would like to set up a one-on-one session in which we get into a private Zoom meeting and talk about anything your heart desires, you can do so with this link right here. And if you have a stream topic, again, today's topic is not sponsored. This was on my own doing and my own research interest. I wanted to learn more about this period and present it for you guys for my own edification. But if you have a stream you would like me to do and perform, do my own research, and then stream it here on YouTube, you can do so with that link right there. You can sponsor a stream, and then I can dive in. I'll email you. You can tell me a little bit about what the topic you had in mind is, and we can get into that. Also, if you guys want to get access to some of the eschatological prophecies, we'll be doing a review of this book right here, Russia Before the Second Coming. This is a very important book in regards to saints and elders talking about the end times and the Antichrist. Do support the non-for-profit eschatonvigil.org, and that you can get access to hundreds and hundreds of prophecies over at eschatonvigil.org. And you can purchase Russia Before the Second Coming. It's now available. So if you actually want to read this book for yourself, I'll tell you this, I can see why this book is widely unknown in the West. It goes very hard at, let's say, the Talmudist, but Jewish involvement in relationship to the spiritual war and the Antichrist, it doesn't hold back. Let's just put it that way. So when we present it, we'll have to watch some of the TOS to make sure we don't violate anything. But if you want to purchase your own copy, you can do so over on the website. And I actually have a promo code if you guys want. Let me grab that real quick. The Eschaton Vigil has sent me a promo code which allows people to purchase for about $20 off. So if you go over to the site and use this code right here, I'm posting it in the chat, you can get $20 off a copy of that book yourself. It's 799 pages, so it's not a small book, but I tell you, it's definitely worth it. So there's that. Also, if you guys are in the market for any Orthodox items, feel free to go over to orthodoxdepot.com, orthodoxdepot.com. Use promo code COTEL, COTEL, Church of the Eternal Logos. You get 10% off. You can help me out, as well as a great Orthodox company here in the Midwest. Check out orthodoxdepot.com. All right. Now let's get into our stream here. And I want to go over some questions and answers with Mark Lee Gardner before we actually hit my document, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of perspective on today's stream and who Mark is and why I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So let me pull him up real quick. And we got to click through because this is from Wired Magazine, which is very interesting because it's talking about the Wild West, and Wired Magazine is very much a technology-oriented outlet. But we're going to click through here because it's Wired. I'm afraid they're going to copyright strike it, so we can't really watch more than maybe a minute or two and then move on. So we're going to click through some of these some of these sections right through here that I think are really interesting. But the first one is historian Mark Lee Gardner talking about some of the most dangerous outlaws in the Old West. Again, we're going to be talking in more detail about all these figures, but here we go. And let me slow it down a little bit. I got everything sped up because that's what I do.
Outlaw in the Old West. Well, there's several candidates. John Wesley Hardin maybe killed as many as 24 men. He's the one you might have heard of that killed a man just for snoring. He heard a loud snoring through the thin wall in this hotel and fired several shots, and he stopped snoring. But I just think Jesse and Frank James are a little scarier. I would vote for them as the most dangerous. Jesse and Frank had come out of a very vicious, horrible Civil War. One of their leaders was called Bloody Bill Anderson, and he actually hung Union soldiers' scalps from his bridle and saddle. And after the war, because they'd become so numb to that violence, it just didn't bother them to kill somebody. And there were lots of innocent victims in their robberies. You either opened up the safe or you got shot, and they were serious. One man who knew them said, if Jesse said he was going to kill you, you could probably talk him out of it. But if Frank said he was going to kill you, he was going to kill you.
And then the next one, so we're going to be skipping. We're not going to listen to each one of these questions. But in regards to the shootout at the OK Corral, he answers, which film did it better? So here's his thoughts.
Or Wyatt Earp. Which film did the OK Corral scene best? I feel like the Wyatt Earp, Kevin Costner version is a little more accurate in that it has the gunfighters much closer together. They were literally within a few feet of each other. The Tombstone movie with Kurt Russell, it's a very big lot. And actually that lot where the gunfight occurred, estimates are as small as 15 feet across. So it's very tight, very compacted. One thing that I liked about both films was that they did pull from the historical dialogue that was taken down in witness testimony after the OK Corral gunfight. That one famous line where Doc Holliday tells one of the McClarys, he says, "You're a daisy if you do." Well, that actually was what he spoke at the time. But the one thing that really stood out to me was that they have the Earps and Doc Holliday pulling guns from holsters. Wyatt Earp pulled his revolver from a coat pocket. Doc Holliday pulled his revolver from a coat pocket. It was very common at that time to have tailors make pistol pockets in your coats. It said that Wyatt Earp's pocket was actually lined with canvas to ease a revolver coming out of that pocket and not catching the hammer on your coat.
So that was, again, interesting little perspective on which film depicted the shootout at the OK Corral the best. Another one was talking about some of the stricter gun laws, and I already kind of mentioned this in the opening, but I'll let him hit it a little bit further.
Watching a Western the other day, and they had to check their guns to come into the city. Made me think, did the Old West have stricter gun laws than we have now? They did have very strict gun laws in the towns or the cities. Places like Tombstone, Wichita, and Dodge City, these are big cattle towns. They're driving huge herds of cattle in. The cowboys are getting paid off. They have guns. It's dangerous. So these communities had city ordinances preventing the wearing of guns, preventing having concealed weapons. Only lawmen were able to carry their guns. It's a very dangerous occupation for a lawman to disarm drunken cowboys. So these cowboys, when they came in with their guns, they had to check them. They had to drop them off at a certain location. And then when they were leaving town, they could pick their guns up and take them back with them. But they could not be wearing firearms while they were in these city limits. At least.
And then the next question I wanted to share with you guys was the old saloon drink menu. So what kind of drinks did they have back then?
Saloons have anything else to drink other than whiskey and beer. Cowboys must like a fancy drink every once in a while. All these boom towns, whether it was Dodge City or Deadwood or Tombstone, they had well-stocked bars. And we have lots of...
And look how well-stocked that bar is. I mean, he wasn't joking. Imagine, again, how remote some of these places were. Like Tombstone, Arizona it was just a territory. It wasn't even a state of the United States. And he's going to talk a little bit more about the variety of wines and whiskeys. And I'm going to go, at one point, we're going to listen to the cuisine of the Wild West and how some of these places were so wealthy due to the cattle trade that they had fresh oysters every day. And that oysters were actually a very common delicacy in the West. But check out that bar for something that's so remote. I mean, that really does look like a movie set.
Lots of photographs, and you can see all different types of bottles, whether it's wine or champagne, brandy, gin. In 1874, there was a book published, The Bartender's Guide, that gave you how to make cordials, juleps, the more elaborate bars. And there were many. Could just make any drink that you had a hankering for. Javert Hugh.
So sorry, guys, we can't watch the whole thing because this is copyrighted. So we got to click through some of these sections. So this one was really interesting as he's asked, when did the Old West officially end? And I was looking at this question as well, trying to find answers. And there's a wide variety of speculation depending on which academic you talk to. It seemed like the general consensus was once barbed wire fences became more normalized in the West. So these giant territories with cattle, at one point, these landowners, especially in the 1890s, began to put up fences. And once they put up fences, the job of the cowboy, the job of these people moving, thousands of heads of cattle at a time, isn't really necessary anymore. And because of the railroad system and its expansion, they really don't have to drive the cattle as far as they used to, and they can kind of just set up ranches next to the railroad stations or the points in which the meat trade is going to occur. Because when the railroad, so during Chicago's known for like meat packing, right? And so during the Civil War, Chicago was essential for feeding Union soldiers. Much of the meat was being processed through Chicago. Well, once the Civil War ends, it kind of dwindles down a little bit. But what now, as the railroad gets to the West Coast, and especially towards the Rockies, now they can ship all this cattle and all this meat all the way to Chicago, and it really starts up the meatpacking industry again. So anyways, I digress. But here is his thoughts on when did the Old West officially end?
When did the Old West officially end? Just saw Colors of the Flower Moon, and it takes place in the 20s, but still feels very much like the late 1800s. Well, that's a great question. Some people might say the buffalo. When the buffalo are no longer free ranging, when barbed wire fences are stretched across the plains, there are no longer cattle drives, that could be the end of the Old West. But to me, it's when the automobile takes the place of the horse. Maybe that's the 1930s or 40s, but when there's no more horses on the streets, then to me, the Old West is over. Jed Houston.
And that was an interesting take because he is a prominent historian. Based on what I was reading, he's written multiple books on the Old West. And so I thought that was interesting for him. He characterizes the end when the arrival of the automobile, which you begin to see in the 1930s in places in California and some of these larger cities out west. That's a much later date than many of these other scholars. Many of them point towards basically the end of the 1890s, and they point towards the arrival of fencing. They point towards mass immigration towards the West, Americans moving westward, and just the job of the cowboy no longer being needed. But for Mark Gardner, for him, it's the doing away with the horse. And I find that pretty interesting because people like Butch Cassidy, there's something so freeing about the horse, even more so than the automobile, because for us Americans, and this is another thing very different from the European mind. I remember being in Greece with my Greek friend, and he lived in Saras, and we were going to Orianopoli, which is the city you go to before Mount Athos. And it was probably maybe a 2-3 hour drive. I can't remember exactly, but somewhere in that range. And for them and the Greeks, they thought this was a long drive, this was a day event. And for us Americans, driving 2 hours or 3 hours, that's not that big of a deal because the country is so big. We're so used to it. And so there's a sense of freedom with the American automobile. But on some of the things I was reading, the horse, because you didn't need a road per se. And so like somebody like Butch Cassidy, who robs all these trains, does all this crime in the United States, eventually they flee down to South America, and he's killed in Bolivia. But the fact that they got down there by horse, they traveled everywhere by horse. And many of these people that would rob trains and stuff, once they robbed them, with the plains, places like Nebraska and Kansas, if you had a horse, you could easily get away, especially if you had a head start on law enforcement. So very, very interesting thought that kind of came to me through all this. And then here's him talking a little bit about Annie Oakley. So if you guys are familiar with Buffalo Bill and his sort of Wild West circus, if you will, and we're going to talk more about Buffalo Bill here in a little bit, but one of the women, the sharpshooters of his show was Annie Oakley. Very interesting little tidbit he puts here. And then he talks a little bit about Billy the Kid, which I want to show you guys.
Wait, Annie Oakley was real? Yes, she was real. Annie Oakley was the real deal, too. She was an excellent marksman. She had a partner. She would look at the mirror, had the gun over her shoulder. He'd have a cigarette in his lips, and she would shoot off the end of the cigarette. It seems very dangerous. Buffalo Bill Cody, the Wild West exhibition, traveled really around the world. One of the big draws for Buffalo Bill Cody's show was these stage recreations, whether it was a buffalo hunt, whether it was an Indian attack on a wagon train, a robber's attack on a stagecoach, the cavalry. They got to see Sitting Bull one year. Sitting Bull was well known as a leader of the Lakotas. They actually could see this person they read about, see him in the flesh. I mean, it was quite an experience. Very, very popular, and it went for decades. At Minonock said,
and so this next one, I want to answer. I want you guys to hear this question as well, but just to break it up so we don't get flagged for copyright, I want to thank Josiah Elleron, throws in $5, says, God bless you for your holy work. Thank you so much, Josiah, for your support. I truly do appreciate it. And Brody Alexander throws in $5, says, David, I love you, man, for reals. Well, thank you, Brody. I love you as well, and thank you for the support, my man. I do appreciate that. So again, guys, we have a goal of 20 super chats for today's stream. So if you want to kind of contribute to reaching our goal, thank you to Josiah and Brody. Please send in a super chat. We'd greatly appreciate that. And over on the Dono chat, we had some come in. Nicholas Clinton throws in $15 and says, hey, Patrick, it was great speaking with you this past weekend at the Men of God conference. Yes, it was. God bless you, Nick. Pretty awesome happenstance. Yes, it was. Thank you for what you do, and many years to you. Thank you very much, brother, and God bless you. It was a pleasure to meet you. And he's referring to a men's retreat that was at St. George in Fishers, Indiana. It's one of the nicer churches in the state of Indiana. It's Antiochian. It's the sister parish to my little humble abode that I call my parish and church, but beautiful, beautiful place. And we were able to listen to a presentation by Father Hans Jacobsy, who should be coming on the channel. I was able to meet with him and chat with him. So we should be having a stream here soon with Father Hans. And Keenan throws in $5, says, for the goal and the research. Well, thank you so much, Keenan, for the $5, my brother. God bless you and your family. I hope you are doing well, my man. Thank you for the $5. And Glitchy throws in $6. Thank you very much, Glitchy. Says, unexpected topic. I love it. And I can't even express how grateful I am for your work. I'm a cowboy at heart, electrician by trade. Well, thank you very much, Glitchy. I do appreciate that. And Glitchy threw in another $6. Thank you so much, brother. He says, not sure if my last my last message went through. I'll say it again, unexpected, but appreciated. Love the choice of topic. Very near and dear to me. Can't thank you enough for the work. Well, thank you very much, Glitchy. I do appreciate that, my man. And Austin DeTulio throws in $5, says, let's reach that goal. Thank you so much, Austin, for the $5. I do appreciate that. And mind you, too, I actually had a gentleman reach out to me today. His name was let me get his last name. I remember it was Brandon. And he is an Orthodox catechumen, and he runs a YouTube channel that I actually came across for my research today. Let me show you guys that. Just if you guys want to follow it and check out his stuff, it's actually pretty quality. Crap. Let me exit out here. Let me go here. Here's the Japanese. I want to show you guys that. This is the Japanese Cowboys. They love the American West. I'm going to show you guys that in a second. But this YouTube channel right here, History at the OK Corral. I missed the L. This one right here, I'll share this link with you guys. The gentleman who actually runs this YouTube channel, he's got 92,000 subs, much bigger than my channel. He reached out to me, saw the topic for today's stream, and let me know that this was his channel. And I started going through some of the videos. Really, really good stuff. So let me share this link with you guys. If anybody wants to support Brandon's work, go subscribe to his YouTube channel. I'm going to do it right now and help an Orthodox brother out. So thank you guys for the support. And thank you very much to everybody helping me reach my goal. Thank you, Austin, Brody, Josiah. Thank you, First Person Q, Glitchy, Keenan. Really appreciate you guys. Nicholas Clinton and John Anon. So, okay, let's continue on here. This is really interesting. He's talking about Billy the Kid. If you guys are familiar with who Billy the Kid is, he'll introduce him. But this was a renowned outlaw and sharpshooter. And so here we go.
Says, what do you mean? Authenticated photo of the real Billy the Kid was only found in 2011. Well, there is only one authenticated, and it existed a lot before 2011. It says here, this is a tintype that was made at Fort Sumner of Billy the Kid by a traveling photographer. We don't know who the photographer was. And there's something you have to know about tintypes. Tintypes are reverse images. And if you look in this image, you would think that Billy the Kid was left-handed. In fact, there's a movie with Paul Newman called The Left-Handed Gun. That's the story of Billy the Kid. He's called the left-handed gun because of this image. But because we know that tintypes are reverse images, actually, Billy has his pistol on his right hip. So this is the image corrected the way that it should be. And actually, this is an enlargement of the tintype. The actual tintype was the size of this tintype. It's very small. And the reason it's called a tintype is because the photograph is actually made on tin. The emulsion is on a very thin piece of tin. Technical name, ferrotype. And the reason we know that this photo of Billy the Kid is authentic is because it was identified as Billy the Kid in his own lifetime. It appeared in the Illustrated Police News while he was still alive. A few years ago, this actual tintype, the one that's in this image, this sold at auction for $2.3 million. So that had a huge effect because when a small tintype brings that kind of money, people are going to start looking for other pictures of Billy the Kid. So in recent years, there have been a lot of photos. They have some kind of a resemblance to Billy the Kid, but you just can't identify a photo based on resemblance. You have to have some kind of provenance that links it to Billy the Kid. There's a picture of supposedly Billy the Kid playing croquet. These are wannabe images. There's no connection with that image to Billy the Kid. At JC Meow.
Okay. And then next question that I thought was interesting. He talks about black cowboys. We already addressed that. Branding cattle. Popularity of the 10 gauge shotgun. I thought this was interesting.
Shotgun so popular in the Wild West? Did they just want things extra super duper dead or what? Well, they did want things dead. So if you've heard of the stagecoaches, if you heard of Wells Fargo, the shotgun messenger, he sat next to the driver and he held a 10 gauge shotgun. And that's where the phrase comes that you're riding shotgun. It was also manufactured with a shorter barrel. When the gun goes off, the shot is going to spread quicker at your target. It's going to be very wide. If you're riding shotgun, and you got a couple of robbers up there, you want a big pattern and hopefully knock them out of commission. There were two other firearms, very popular. One is the Winchester repeater. You might have heard of the model 1873. It is a lever action weapon, so it fires several rounds each time you work the lever action. The other weapon that also fired several rounds is the Colt single action army revolver. Sometimes they called the Colt the Peacemaker because that ended any kind of arguments. It has 6 chambers. You tried not to put a bullet in the chamber underneath the hammer because if the gun dropped or if you knocked it against something and the hammer went into the cartridge, it could go off. So most cowboys, most lawmen, they rested the hammer on an empty chamber so that they wouldn't have any kind of accidents.
So that's a little bit, and I have a section talking a little bit about some of the guns that they use in my document. This was interesting. I know I have not played Red Dead Redemption. I've seen videos online, but this is Mark answering how accurate was Red Dead Redemption, the video game, to the actual Wild West.
How accurate is Red Dead Redemption? I think it's as accurate as an average to good Western. One thing that always stands out to me in that game is the way the men wear their guns in their holsters. It's the Hollywood holster rig. They have the holsters really low down on the hips for the fast draw. But in the actual Old West, they had them riding up very high. I mean, it's easier to get on a horse if you got the holster up high on your belt. It seems like there's also a lot of action in a campground. And a campground was actually kind of a common thing. If you're just arriving at a location or town, well, you're going to be camping on the outside of town before you get settled in. That's what the Earps did when they came to Tombstone. They didn't initially have a place to live. Ebica asks.
So there you go. Red Dead Redemption, other than the way that the gun held, does have some relationship to the historicity of the Wild West. He talks a little bit about literacy rates and that there's a misconception that many people in the West were illiterate. Not the case, actually. They had many schoolhouses, and even adults would teach other adults how to read. So even though there were some people that were illiterate, many people that made their way westward were actually literate, some better than others. But even some of the outlaws who didn't have formal education could still read or write. And so he mentions that. Um, and then here's the one on shootout etiquette. As I was talking to you about, they didn't exactly wait for each other. So here's this
in the
section.
Old West and was in standoffs, I wouldn't wait to shoot. I'd shoot right away. Why did they wait? It's literally a contest to shoot the other guy first. Well, they did not wait. There were not these Hollywood standoffs between gunfighters. Normally, these guys are taking pot shots. They're trying to assassinate or ambush him. If you're dealing with a murderous individual who's adept at firearms, you're not going to give him a chance to kill you. Perfect example is with Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Pat Garrett was not going to give Billy a chance to gun him down, to draw his gun. When Billy the Kid steps into the darkened room at Fort Sumner and says, "Key&S, who is it?" Pat Garrett recognized his voice and he opened up. He fired 2 shots. The first shot hit Billy in the chest, and Outlaw Billy the Kid was no more. The only time there was actually really a classic standoff was at the OK Corral. At Morgan, some comment, and I would not survive in the Old West. Pork and beans is just grim.
I want to wait 1 second because this was another question I wanted to show you guys in regards to actually the cuisine of the Wild West was more sophisticated than I even thought. And he goes into oysters being something that was able to sort of preserve for weeks at a time and that it made its way to the West.
Grim. Well, it wasn't just pork and beans. There was actually pretty fine dining. In the boom towns, cattle towns, they actually had oyster saloons. In Dodge City in the 1870s, there was one saloon that advertised fresh oysters daily. These would be packed in barrels, and actually oysters could last for a few weeks before they spoiled. So as long as you had a wagon train or stagecoaches, actually get fresh shipments in each day. But if you're a cowboy and you're with the cattle herd out on the range or driving the cattle from Texas up, well, you got fresh beef on the hoof, so you can have fresh beef. But beans were popular because they stored well. I mean, they're dry. If you're on the trail, you want foods that are going to last quite a while. So each cattle drive had a chuck wagon. The chuck box had flour, dried beans. The cooks, he's got Dutch ovens where he can actually make biscuits, cornbread. There was a little bit of variety there, even on a cattle drive. At what?
So very interesting little tidbit about the Wild West. And then Mark's favorite gunslinger. This was another section I wanted to share with you guys.
Ask, who is your favorite Old West gunfighter? Now that's tough. I always had liked the look of Wild Bill Hickok because he had this flowing long hair. It's curly. He was a snappy dresser. And then he had those.
Wild Bill Hickok, unlike many, for example, Jesse James and his brother Frank, who were former Confederate soldiers, Wild Bill was actually a Union soldier and a sharpshooter. So a little bit of an interesting tidbit there.
2 pistols pointing forward, what they call the cross draw, and they're pearl handled or ivory handled. But I think he's edged out for me by Doc Holliday. Doc Holliday had a dental degree. He was a heavy drinker. He could be very belligerent. And then he has this great friend, the greatest lawman in the West, Wyatt Earp. The reason they're friends is because Doc Holliday actually saved Wyatt Earp's life in Dodge City. Optiplex 9000 asked, what was there
to do in a saloon? This is actually pretty interesting as well. Let me wait a couple seconds and then we'll play that one because, again, this video is copyrighted, so we have to be really careful about not playing too much right next to each other because they'll get me. Major thank you to Bruce Roberts, throws in $7, says goal. Thank you very much, Bruce. I appreciate you helping me reach my goal. And Robert Cesario throws in 5 and says, Wild West is a vibe. First gun I bought was a new Winchester 1892. Very nice. Funny enough, the company that makes them is actually in Japan. There you go. And, that's where I was going to show you guys this, this Japanese culture here where they actually, they dress up as cowboys and there's like a whole, like on TikTok, I was finding videos of Japanese guys on YouTube that are like practicing the quick draw and the flip and all this different stuff. And also denim. I don't know if you guys, I'm not a denim connoisseur, but I had a friend who was a denim connoisseur. And unfortunately, this was a major feature of, and we'll get into it. I have a section on attire and stuff, why denim was so important. You know, Levi Strauss, the German immigrant, began creating, denim jean pants and stuff like that. But now, from what my understanding from some of the sort of denim world that I'm not totally oriented in, Japan is like the number one creator of like American denim now. And we're talking about the denim that you don't wash, like the real stiff denim back in the day that's supposed to last a lifetime, that you don't really wash, very stiff. Apparently Japan's like the number one in making those now. How funny is it to see all these Japanese guys shoot cap guns? Anyways, let's get back to this section. I don't know. I thought that was hilarious. And I can share that video if you guys want to watch that full video of all these Japanese guys. They just go through and they pretend they're shooting each other. They love the Wild West. Here, I'll share that with you guys if you guys want to watch that. Funny stuff. So thank you, Robert. Do appreciate it. And then Mud, a COTEL crew member for 19 months, says Billy the Kid looks like an autistic fella who became hyper fixated on being good with guns. He definitely was that, but there was no CIA to corrupt him. Yeah, that's actually true. Fair enough, Mud. Fair enough. And G. Bailey throws in $5, says the internet was like a neo wild west when it was created. Very true. A new frontier, highly unregulated and depraved, but with a lot of potential. I would absolutely agree with you, and highlight again the American context in which the internet and the wild web, if you want to put it that way, the World Wide Web, how that was again sort of we know about DARPA, we know that this was an intelligent creation by the intelligence agencies, but it was like the Wild West. And again, it's fixated on this sort of core American feature of how the Wild West still informs us. And I would argue, based on my research with transhumanism, looking at Silicon Valley, that's partly why so many of these technologies like Google and even Elon Musk companies, they're American, because and on the West Coast and in the Bay Area, right? San Francisco was part of the gold rush, the 49ers. This had to do with all the miners coming for the gold rush back in the 1860s and 70s, when people were searching for gold. Of course, Nevada and other places like that as well, Arizona. But it's like the tech, the whole techno scene, the tech world. This is all very much like the new frontier. Silicon Valley is a sort of new frontier, not one that I'm super proud about, but certainly kind of rooted within that American context. So thank you very much, G. Bailey. All right, let's listen to Mark again talk about what was there to do in a saloon in the Wild West.
What was there to do in a saloon in the Wild West? Did people just drink? Was there any food served or activities hosted by the owner? There were all kinds of things going on in a saloon. Some saloons, of course, had eating establishments connected to them. They actually had lunch counters. In the 19th century, lunch wasn't the standard noonday meal. If you were having lunch, it meant a snack or a small meal. In Tombstone, Arizona, there was a saloon called the Oriental, and it had chandeliers, and it had the Brussels carpets. It had these elaborate carved wooden back bars with large mirrors. Some of these saloons actually had a reading area where they stocked magazines and books, and so you could enjoy that where you're taking a break from the faro table. There were actually brothels that coexisted in these communities along with saloons, and prostitution was going on. You often had a situation where a gambler had a girlfriend or significant other who was a prostitute. One of the unknown things about Wyatt Earp, he actually worked in a brothel. He was a bouncer, and he also might have been a pimp himself for a short time. He did this in Peoria, Illinois as a young man. Gracely wants to know, what are some lesser known facts about the Old West that might surprise?
We'll watch this section too, but one of the things about the brothels, based on some of the research I was getting into, is that for women, obviously a lot of these cowboys and people moving out west, not as many women out there. And so women were highly sought after. But at that point, women mostly did domestic work. And so they could often do washing laundry and stuff for an hourly wage or a daily wage. But they could become a prostitute, especially in one of these boom towns, these major cattle cities. Again, Dodge City, And I got a bunch pulled up here. Let me see. So Tombstone, Arizona, Dodge City, Kansas, Deadwood, South Dakota, Virginia City, Nevada. These were major boom towns for the cattle drive, and Cowboys were there, and they had big cities. And so these women could become prostitutes, and they could make as much that a woman made doing laundry in a week, they could make in one night. And it was interesting to hear some of the stories about these young women, beautiful young women that would become prostitutes. Some of them would get married. Many of them would not. They would be sort of lifelong prostitutes. When the Chinese immigrants came, even the Chinese men actually sold many of the women to these brothels and stuff to be used for prostitution. But for young women, unless you came from a family that kind of already had some money, it was hard for them to find a husband. So once they became of age, they had to sort of make a decision. Were they going to maintain their purity and wait out for a husband, which again, there's plenty of men out there, but maybe not the type of men they were looking, or were they going to become a prostitute? And for them, prostitution was a very lucrative business. And again, you think, going back to G. Bailey's comment with the World Wide Web and the internet, we think about pornography. Well, it kind of touches on the brothels and the importance of those in the Wild West as well.
Surprised most? Well, one thing that might surprise most is there actually was more than one Billy the Kid. We always think of William H. Bonney, Henry McCarty, alias the Kid. There was actually a Billy the Kid in Tombstone, Arizona at the time of the OK Corral. If you look at the prison records, you'll find a lot of people that had the nickname or went by Billy the Kid. Another thing that's not well known and actually kind of eerie involves the outlaw Jesse James. Jesse James was very superstitious, and he claimed to see a ball of light, what we might call or refer to as ball lightning. Some people call it swamp gas, and they were kind of an omen. Something big was going to happen. He saw this light before the Northfield raid, where the gang was defeated and driven out of town by the townspeople. And he also saw it a short time before he was assassinated by the Ford brothers. At Shanted X.
All right. Let's see if there's any more questions here. I wanted, like the saloon doors, for if you guys want to listen to that one, we can. Saloon doors are a Hollywood creation. We'll listen to Mark's take on the saloon doors real quick.
Wonder why the saloon doors in the Old West were designed the way they were. I've looked at lots of photos of saloon exteriors, historic photographs, and I haven't yet come across one with these swinging doors. Usually it's just a regular door or large door. My suspicion is that these swinging doors were very convenient for movie makers, because you can see someone coming in and out. The swinging door you can see right away. That's Wyatt Earp, that's Wild Bill Hickok. So I'm guessing that's kind of a Hollywood thing, those swinging doors. Fun fact, some of these Old West characters, figures, made it out to Hollywood. And some of these early silent films had these Western legends, these Western characters on set advising. In fact, some of these individuals even appeared in the background scenes of some of these films. Carl 2K1 asked,
and in here, I can share this whole, if you want to watch all this again, the reason I'm clicking through it is because it's a copyrighted video. I don't want to get the stream taken down. But much of the mythology of the Wild West, again, we've already heard about the low belt for a quick draw. That was a Western invention, or a Hollywood invention about the Wild West. So are these saloon doors. The next one, he's asked about which were the toughest Native American tribes. And I do have a section talking about the Indians. So let's hear Mark's description on some of the sort of fierce Native American tribes.
Ask which Native American tribes were the most fearsome and formidable foe the U.S. government faced, and why. So there are several nations in the American West. In the Southwest, we have generally the Apaches. On the Central Plains, we have the Cheyennes and Arapahoes. Down here in Texas and the Southern Plains, the Comanches. And then up here on the Northern Plains, we have the Crow and the Lakota. The Crows became allies of the U.S. government or the military. But, that question, which is the most fearsome or formidable, you have to remember they're all fighting for their culture, for their life ways, for their people. Who wouldn't be formidable or ferocious if you're trying to protect your families? And that's certainly the case with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull. They refused to sign treaties. And that put them on a collision course with a man named George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry. Here's another.
So now he goes into Custer and Little Bighorn, which again, they were decimated by the Native Americans. One of the cool things was about Navajo blankets. I wanted to play that one, and when did the Old West start? And then we'll move on to my
I
document.
didn't realize how well made Navajo blankets were in the 1800s. That history of living off the earth with bare essentials was amazing. Well, it truly was. And we've got a Navajo blanket right here. The Navajos were making blankets as early as the 1600s. They learned to make blankets apparently from the Pueblo Indians who had long been making blankets. They're made on a vertical loom. It's a very tight weave. The Navajos eventually raised their own sheep so they could have their own wool, and it became an industry that exists to this day. So this is a pipe bag. This tells us that the North American Indians on the plains were involved in a global market economy. This decoration are glass beads that were made in Italy. They were transported here in trade with the Plains Indians for their buffalo robes. The buffalo robes are being shipped to Europe. The North American Indians are getting brass kettles. They're getting firearms. I mean, they're tied into the entire world, and it's reflected in this. They learned to live off the land, what nature provided them. They made very good use of, and at the same time, they made it beautiful. At Ico Rich asked, when does the Old West start? And he's got a poll. So one option here is Lewis and Clark. 1803 to 1806, the core of discovery. Lewis and Clark are sent out west by Thomas Jefferson to really explore the Louisiana Purchase that they've just acquired from France. They're looking for a transportation route. We've got mountains, plains. There's an unexplored country. Is there a way to get across it? They're introducing some of these indigenous populations, these Indian nations, to the United States. Lewis and Clark brought with them peace medals. The Indians were used to getting peace medals because of Great Britain, France, and Spain. And so the United States, well, we have to have our peace medals to impress these leaders of these Indian nations as well. Another is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And that is how the United States acquired from Mexico what we now call the American Southwest. This is the whole chunk of land that's acquired through that treaty. So that's another option, is the beginning of the West, or at least according to the poll. We also have the end of the Civil War. You have a lot of Civil War veterans that go west. But we also have here the Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad stretches all across the plains and across the Rocky Mountains, and it allows a migration of people, passengers, to take the trains all the way across the country. In a way, this term you heard, manifest destiny, that the United States was destined to expand from ocean to ocean. The railroad completes that idea, that theory. So those are all really good suggestions. I kind of like the end of the Civil War for that classic period of the Old West.
And that was my general takeaway from the research I did. It's really the end of the Civil War to really the 1890s, that iconic period of the Wild West. Again, Mark said that he would identify with the beginning of the car and the doing away with horses in the street. Fair enough. But that is going to do that video. Now I have a couple other videos. I'm going to get into my document next. But this was one that I found pretty interesting. We may be able to play this one. This is 10 cowboy myths debunked. I have my own top 10 misconceptions. And then this one I really liked with Wild Bill Hickok. I am a fan of Wild Bill after learning a little bit more about him. A very interesting guy. Same with Doc Holliday. But this one right here, this was an interview that I found, and we're going to begin it where he's talking about Tombstone. This is with Mark Gardner. So this was a recent interview. This was October 29th, so just a couple weeks ago. American History Gazette. Shout out to that channel. Don't know who it is. No idea. Seems like he does a lot of videos with people talking about American history. But we're going to watch the rest of this interview here. So that's one thing. A few things I wanted to show you guys was just here's a map of some of those boomtown cities, right? Durango, Colorado. Obviously, Denver was another boomtown. North Platte, Nebraska. Deadwood, South Dakota. Dodge City, Kansas. Cache, Oklahoma. Tombstone. And even by car, to travel that is 42 hours today. Now, imagine traveling that now by a horse. And it's so interesting to hear, like, Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, they became friends in Texas, and he saved Wyatt Earp's life in Deadwood, South Dakota. And the shootout of the OK Corral that they were in was in Tombstone, Arizona. So these people were traveling all through this area, all these cowboys, this Wild West scene. I mean, they were traveling miles and miles by horseback. I just wanted to grab that little photo because I thought it was interesting. And we're going to listen to more about the gunfight at the OK Corral in this section here. But if you guys aren't familiar, you guys can look up the gunfight at the OK Corral. Many movies have depicted this. Here's another map of some of the territories at the time. You can see all these were territories. They were not states yet. And then some of the important points that are going to come up in my document, just so manifest destiny, phrase that represented the belief in the 19th century United States that American settlers were destined to expand westward across North America. Again, Jesse James, we're going to be learning more about Jesse James, Billy the Kid, Doc Holliday, Wild Bill Hickok, Bass Reeves. This was actually a really interesting gentleman that I wasn't aware of. Bass Reeves was actually a runaway slave, and he became a U.S. Marshal, the first African-American U.S. Marshal, and he was known for being in gunfights, and he was the region was saturated with horse thieves, cattle rustlers, gunslingers, bandits, and bootleggers, swindlers, and murderers, and he is credited to making up 4,000 arrests in his lifetime, killing 20 men in the line of duty. I thought that was pretty incredible. 4,000 arrests. I wasn't even familiar with him until I did some more research. Bass Reeves. So wanted to throw that in there. Buffalo Bill, of course, we know about the traveling circus and the Wild West, all that stuff. We'll learn more about him. Here's a little article on 10 iconic Western figures. And then in regards to the Native Americans, important figures were like Geronimo. He was a military leader and medicine man for the Apache. Red Cloud and Red Cloud's War, if you're not familiar, he was a leader of the Oglala Lakota, and he was one of the most capable Native American opponents to the United States Army faced in the Western Territories. Very fierce warrior. And then, of course, again, Little Bighorn, Crazy Horse, and Sitting Bull. You guys can look more into them if you'd like. I wasn't going to spend too much time on that. And then I had some articles here, and I want to go back to this one. These are some of the most famous outlaws in the West, and there's some on here that are not on my list. I have my own list of some of the prominent outlaws. And then this article here talks about the actual garb. This is what a cowboy would have looked like back in the day. Although it looks like it may be depicting his jeans over his boots. So according to some of the research I read, very rarely were their jeans over their boots. They would always tuck their denim or whatever pants, whether it be wool or canvas, into their boots so it didn't get snagged on anything, especially their spurs. And then they would have chaps and stuff like that. But there was a mixture of things. So like this is John Nelson. He was a scout and interpreter and guide. And you can see how their attire was a mix of American, Spanish, Native American. Like this is a Native American shirt here. And so this is another depiction. I love the swastikas on this. This woman had swastikas all over her skirt there. But this is another depiction of some of the Native American designs that were used within actual Western cowboy attire and what they would look like. So I don't know, a few interesting little tidbits there. So again, guys, feel free to support my work. If you have any questions or comments, send in a super chat on Streamlabs Dono Chat or here on YouTube. Would greatly appreciate that. Let me just check before we get into the document. Looks like on Dono Chat, John Anon throws in $5. Thank you so much, John Anon. He says, 1849 gold rush also brought Serbians to California. That is true. And the first Orthodox priest born in America, St. Sebastian of Jackson, who was born in San Francisco and baptized on a Russian naval ship, also highlighted in American Orthodox. Very cool. Thank you so much, John Anon, for that. I do appreciate the support and the little historical tidbit. I wasn't aware of that. Okay, so let me show you guys a little bit of my 19-page document that I put together. And really what I do is I just gather information from a bunch of different places and put it all together in a document. And so you can see all the research I did for this one. It's 19 pages, The Real Wild West. Here are 10 of what I would consider the biggest misconceptions of the Wild West. One is that everyone carried guns. Kind of obvious. Not everyone had guns or carried them. And like I said, many places like Tombstone and Dodge City required people to check their guns. And so mostly only lawmen had guns in these major boomtown cities. But there was a lot of vigilantes and crime and robberies and stuff like that. So there is a significant degree of truth. The second one was the West was constantly lawless and violent. It was, but not as bad as Hollywood depicts it. While there was violence in the Wild West, most towns were not as chaotic or lawless as commonly depicted. That's what I found. Vigilantism did occur, but it wasn't the norm, and many towns had established law enforcement to maintain order, so usually a sheriff of some sort. Number three was that cowboys spent most of their time in gunfights or brawls. That's the way, again, Hollywood depicts it, but really not the case. Based on what I was finding, the average life or the average day of a cowboy was primarily very hard work, herding cattle, long days on horseback. Cowboys spent most of their time on ranches or on the trail moving cattle to market. And we're talking about, hundreds, if not sometimes a thousand some heads of cattle moving across hundreds and hundreds of miles. And so they did have gunfights or brawls, and cowboys often abided by a sort of unwritten code. There was like an unwritten personal code amongst cowboys. Number four is that Native Americans were constantly attacking settlers. Actually, what I found is that some of these conflicts weren't until more later in the Wild West period, that at least in the beginning stages, there was a lot of bartering. And so we've seen this in movies where the white man comes and he has like guns and alcohol, and then the Native Americans have maybe herbs and blankets or stuff like this. And that generally seemed to be the case. Obviously, the Indians did attack some of the pioneers. So some I was reading is that they would deliberately try to travel in very large packs, because if you were a single family and you were traveling to the West, you were much more likely to be picked off and potentially killed by Native Americans. Where if there was a very large caravan of horses and wagons, that they would tend to leave it alone, because after a while, the settlers began to form these perimeters where they would, once they saw the Native Americans coming, they would circle up, everybody would get in the center, and all the men with guns would get on the edges, and they would then shoot outwards in a circle towards the Indians, and it was quite effective. So that's one of the reasons that the Native Americans actually did not attack these large caravans as often. There were cases, though. Settlers were mostly men looking for adventure. Not exactly the case. I found, contrary to the myth of the lone male frontiersman, which there were some, but many settlers were actually families moving west to establish farms and start new lives. And women and children made up a significant portion of the Western migration. Women played essential roles in settlement communities, managing households, helping with farming and other stuff. And so I was listening to Mark Gardner, the historian we just saw, talking about the land deeds. And another thing that I thought was really interesting is that basically at that point, there was basically a law that you could go claim like 160 acres. You could go find a piece of land, and then you had to build a structure that was large enough. So they'd had requirements on the size of the structure. So if you're able to build basically a large enough house on 160 acres, and you had witnesses say that you lived there and you stayed there for a significant period of time, you essentially began to own it. And I thought that was pretty cool in regards to being able to just go out west, find yourself 160 acres, 200 acres. You kind of start pinpointing your property lines. You build a big enough house, and now you can, by law, say that is your property. Yeah, the Homestead Act. Well, I'm going to bring that up in just a minute, Bitterklinger. So thank you very much for mentioning that. And then outlaws were the most famous and influential people in the West. Not exactly. What I found is they were often considered nuisances or threats by the local communities. And influential figures in the West included landowners, entrepreneurs, railroad tycoons, and politicians who were instrumental in developing the actual infrastructure to these various towns and settlements. And then 7, the West was full of cowboys and wide-brimmed hats, boots, and spurs. The iconic cowboy uniform popularized in movies. Cowboys were practical clothing, as I showed you in that actual article that I showed you what a cowboy often looked like. And so the sort of Hollywood iconic, that is more towards the end of the Wild Western period. but not everybody dressed like that. And the Wild West lasted for a long time. The era of the Wild West relatively short. It lasted roughly from the end of the Civil War. That's my take. Again, as we saw, some people define it differently. Lewis and Clark, 1803, Louisiana Purchase, before the Civil War, Transcontinental Railroad. I think you really see the outward movement of people as post-Civil War. And often Confederate soldiers, because of the violence and the animosity towards the Union after the end of the war, they could not stomach living under the Union and living under the sort of American regime, and that thousands of these men just decided that to just sell everything they own, or if they had some money, buy what they needed and just travel west. So again, a little piece of info that I found. And then everyone was out to strike it rich. Certainly the gold rush was significant. While some were drawn to the West by the promise of gold. And I saw something in regards to one of the articles in a local newspaper in San Francisco that made its way East Coast. They made it sound like gold was just sitting on the ground. Like if you went out to San Francisco, like you were bound to find gold, which was not the case at all. It was very arduous and diligent work to mine and try to find this gold, but people did, that's for sure. And so the gold rush of 1849 attracted thousands of people, but only a few actually struck it rich. The majority of settlers who moved out west, ordinary people hoping to build sustainable lives for themselves and their families, often through hard work and perseverance. And then the Cowboys and Native Americans were constantly at war, although there is some reality, obviously, to those tensions. Cowboys and Native Americans were not constantly fighting. In fact, many cowboys and settlers had peaceful relationships with native tribes. That was one of the interesting things I found, is how some of these cowboys, especially more prominent ones, would be able to speak the languages of 2 or 3 different tribes and had very cordial relationships with them. So they were not usually involved in direct conflicts with Native American tribes. These conflicts were generally between the U.S. Army and Native Americans, and due to land disputes. So a little interesting thing there. Now, in regards to some famous figures, now some of these I'm going to bring up in the outlaw section I have, but obviously Wild Bill Hickok, 1837 to 1876. He was born as James Butler Hickok in Illinois. Wild Bill Hickok gained fame as a legendary gunslinger, Union soldier, lawman, and scout. Known for his exceptional marksmanship, he became one of the first Wild West icons. Life and legacy: Hickok served in various roles, including scout for the Union Army, as a lawman in Kansas and Nebraska. His skill with firearms and his many tales of shootouts made him a mythical figure. His famous death, shot from behind while playing poker in Deadwood, South Dakota, holding a hand of 2 aces and 2 8s, known as the dead man's hand, which is still very common in Western movies. You'll see somebody playing poker and they'll tip up their cards and you'll see 2 black aces and 2 black 8s, usually is how I've seen it. And this is, again, the dead man's hand that a gentleman shot Wild Bill Hickok from behind in the head while playing poker. And Hickok's life and death exemplify the lawlessness and mythology of the Wild West. His reputation as a fearless lawman and gunslinger helped shape the archetype of the American cowboy hero and symbolize both violence and romance of the frontier life. Buffalo Bill Cody, again, I'll read this section. I'm not going to go too much into it. He wasn't one of my favorite, most interesting figures, but certainly an interesting historical figure nonetheless. He kind of died in poverty, almost bankrupt. But they made it all the way to Europe. Here, I'll read my section. I'm getting ahead of myself. Born William Frederick Cody, Buffalo Bill grew up on the frontier and worked as a scout, Pony Express rider, and buffalo hunter. His hunting skills earned him the nickname Buffalo Bill. He was incredible at, again, killing the buffalo, which actually decimated the buffalo population. I'm talking thousands and thousands of buffaloes. They were killed, and that's how he got his name. Cody rose to fame through his Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows, which traveled across America and Europe. He actually received letters from the King of England and the King of Germany at the time when he was towards the end of his life, when he was bankrupt. and he was showcasing a romanticized version of the Wild West. The shows included reenactments of battles, buffalo hunts, and Native American dances with performers like sharpshooter Annie Oakley, who we introduced. Cody was also advocated for Native American rights later in his life, and his shows helped preserve aspects of Native culture in the public's imagination. Buffalo Bill was instrumental in shaping public perception of the Wild West. His shows popularized Western culture worldwide and laid a groundwork for the Western genre in film and literature. This is where many of these sort of aesthetics of Hollywood, they get it from his Wild West shows. Annie Oakley, we kind of introduced her. She was born Phoebe Ann Moses in Ohio to a fairly poor family, but she was a sharpshooter at early age. And she joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows where her marksmanship astonished audiences. As Mark Gardner said, there was a feat that she would do in these audiences where she would use a mirror. She would put her Winchester rifle on her shoulder, and she would shoot the tip of a cigarette, a burning cigarette, off of her male partner in these shows. And boy, I could not imagine being him. Can you, again, think about that? Late 1800s, and you let this woman do a trick shot with a real bullet where she would shoot the end of your cigarette right in front of your face. Anyways, she was known for feats like, again, shooting a cigarette out of her husband's mouth, splitting playing cards on edge. Throughout her career, she advocated for women's rights and promoted responsible firearm use, yada, yada. Jesse James, I'm going to read more about Jesse James. He's in my outlaw section. Wyatt Earp, he was the famous lawman, again, at the OK Corral shootout. Born in Illinois, Wyatt Earp worked variously as a buffalo hunter, gambler, and lawman. He is best known for his role as a lawman in Tombstone, Arizona, and his involvement in the legendary gunfight at the OK Corral. Earp became a lawman in Dodge City, Kansas, before moving to Tombstone. In 1881, he and his brother, along with Doc Holliday, engaged in a shootout with the Clanton and McClure brothers, who were suspected cattle rustlers. Earp survived the battle and became a symbol of frontier justice. Now, his brother was later killed. He was ambushed by these same cowboys and was killed. And this is where Wyatt Earp kind of goes off the rails. And even though he had this reputation as a lawman, he was very frustrated with the way that the judicial procedures worked in the Wild West. And so when these cowboys or these criminals or outlaws were accused of a crime, usually they worked with a gang of other men. And so they would go to court, and whatever cowboy or outlaw is being accused of something, and many times it was actually true, they would have their men come and provide an alibi. And because the court depended on testimony of people, firsthand testimony, they would be found innocent of various crimes. Wyatt Earp was so fed up with this that after his brother was killed, he went and then personally killed the people that were responsible. Wyatt Earp is remembered as one of the greatest lawmen of the Wild West. His life story, filled with adventure and controversy, symbolizes the struggle to establish law and order on the frontier. Doc Holliday, again, we heard a little bit about him. He was actually a certified dentist. Very interesting man. And we're going to listen to Mark Gardner talk a little bit more explicitly about Doc Holliday. Very interesting. And it's his personal, Mark Gardner, the historian, is one of his personal favorite figures of the Wild West. He was born John Henry Holliday in Georgia. Doc Holliday was a dentist turned gambler and a gunfighter. Despite suffering from tuberculosis, he lived a daring life and became close friends with Wyatt Earp. Holliday's involvement in the gunfight at the OK Corral made him famous. Known for his quick temper and deadly aim, he played a significant role in the shootout and became a feared figure in the West. He is remembered as a gambler, a loyal friend, and a man who lived on his own terms despite a terminal illness. And Doc Holliday's friendship with Wyatt Earp and his role in the OK Corral shootout made him a legendary figure. He represents the darker, grittier side of the Wild West, embodying both the thrill and danger of the frontier life. And then, as I said, Sitting Bull, I also added 2 Native American figures, because you can't really talk about the Wild West without talking about some of the Native Americans. And so he was a Lakota Sioux chief. Sitting Bull was born in what is now South Dakota. Again, Sitting Bull is very important for the Battle of Little Bighorn. He became a respected leader, uniting the Sioux tribes in resistance against U.S. government policies that encroached on native lands. Sitting Bull played a pivotal role in the Native American resistance, most famous at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, where General George Custer's force were defeated. Later, he was forced onto a reservation and toured briefly with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He was killed during an attempt to arrest him from allegedly supporting the ghost dance movement. And he is a symbol of Native American resistance. Even today, he's still a very popular figure in Native American circles. As a resistance to U.S. expansion and the defense of a traditional ways of life, his leadership and his victory at Little Bighorn remained a defining moment in American history, illustrating the strength and resilience of Native American culture. And then another figure is Geronimo. Maybe some of you aren't as familiar with him. He was born in present-day Arizona. Geronimo was a leader of the Apache tribe who fiercely resisted Mexican and American forces that encroached on Apache land. His life and legacy: Geronimo was a skilled warrior, leading numerous raids and evading capture by the U.S. Army for years. He surrendered in 1886 after decades of resistance, was held as a prisoner of war for the remainder of his life. Later, he became a public figure, attending the 1904 World's Fair and riding in Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade. Geronimo's resistance symbolizes sort of Native American resilience and the struggle to defend ancestral lands. Now, this was kind of my favorite, was getting into the outlaws, like some of the most famous outlaws. So obviously, first and foremost is Jesse James, and his brother Frank James. So his background: Jesse James was born in Missouri. He was a Confederate guerrilla during the Civil War. And after the war, he turned to crime, leading the James Younger gang in a series of daring bank and train robberies. Bank robberies. The gang first known for his bank robbery was in Liberty, Missouri. In 1866, Jesse's gang became known for targeting banks, especially those believed who were aligned with Union sympathies in states like Missouri, Iowa, and Kentucky. Train robberies. In 1873, the gang committed one of the first major train robberies in Adair, Iowa, where they derailed a train and looted its safe. Reputation as a Robin Hood figure. Now, did he actually give money back to the poor? I didn't find conclusive evidence of this, but he certainly developed a sort of mythos in the American psyche as a Robin Hood figure. Newspapers, particularly pro-Southern outlets, portrayed Jesse as a Robin Hood-like figure fighting the wealthy elites, although little evidence suggests he actually shared his spoils with the poor. And his legacy: Jesse James was shot in the back by Robert Ford, who was actually working with the U.S. government. This was the U.S. government worked in tandem with Robert Ford to kill Jesse James. And he was actually a fellow gang member. And in 1882, ending his criminal career, his life and crimes have been mythologized, and he remains a central figure in American folklore as a rebellious anti-hero. Billy the Kid, we got introduced to his that tin print of him. He was actually right-handed. He was born Henry McCarty, and Billy the Kid grew up in New York, but moved west as a child. He became a notorious outlaw in New Mexico, participating in the Lincoln County War and gaining a reputation as a deadly gunfighter. Some of his criminal activities and notable crimes is obviously the Lincoln County War. Billy became involved in the Lincoln County War, a violent conflict between two factions vying for control over the county's economy. During the war, Billy and his gang, known as the Regulators, participated in several gunfights, allegedly killing Sheriff William Brady. Escapes and murders. Billy the Kid was known for escaping jail multiple times. He allegedly killed up to 21 men, though historians believe the actual number is closer to 8 or 9. I have seen some people that believe in the 21 number or somewhere around, but I don't know. I also found multiple scholars say it's and that's where Mark Gardner, his opinion was that it was somewhere around 8 to 12. But reputation as a charming outlaw: Billy was young and charismatic, gaining fame as a folk hero in the Southwest. His reputation was enhanced by tales of his clever escapes and skill with firearms. His end: Billy the Kid was shot and killed by Sheriff Pat Garrett in 1881. His legend has grown over the years, and many stories exaggerating his exploits and painting him as a rebellious youth standing up against corruption. Butch Cassidy, another very interesting figure in the Sundance Kid. Robert Leroy Parker, known as Butch Cassidy, and his partner Harry Longenbaugh The Sundance Kid led a gang called the Wild Bunch. They were known for robbing trains and banks across the American West. Criminal activities, notable crimes, train robberies again, like Jesse James. The Wild Bunch carried out a string of train robberies, including the infamous 1899 Wilcox train robbery in Wyoming, where they blew up a safe and stole thousands of dollars in cash. Now, I didn't catch a number on how much Butch Cassidy had, but in regards to Jesse James, I did find a number that in today's wealth, at least a couple of years ago, it would have been somewhere in the ballpark between $6 to $7 million that Jesse James and his brother Frank James were able to steal. The James Younger gang, $6 to $7 million was the total. I'm not sure about Butch Cassidy, but the bank heist. They also robbed banks, including the Bank of Montpelier in Idaho in 1896. The gang was meticulous in planning, often hiding out in remote hideaways after heist. And that was part of his reputation, is that unlike Jesse the James, or maybe I shouldn't say unlike, but most specifically to Butch Cassidy, is they planned meticulously for any of the crimes that they were going to accomplish. And this was one of the reasons why they were able to escape the law for so long. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were known for their likable personalities, and some accounts suggest they avoided violence whenever possible. Their charm and style helped romanticize their image. And as Mark Gardner highlighted when the video we were watching, that Jesse James and his brother Frank James, he said, Jesse James, you could be talked out. If he said he was going to kill you, you could probably talk him out of it. But if Frank James said he was going to kill you, he was going to kill you. Their end and legacy: in 1908, they allegedly fled to South America, where they reportedly died in a shootout in Bolivia. Their story, especially as portrayed in the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, has added to their legacy as two of the most charismatic outlaws in American history. Bella Starr, this was actually a female, notorious female outlaw, born Myra Mayabel Shirley. Bella Starr was a notorious female outlaw who associated with several infamous criminals. Again, Jesse James. No, she was known as the Bandit Queen, and she operated in Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. She did horse theft, so Bella was involved in horse theft and bootlegging, operating her ranch as a sanctuary for outlaws on the run. Her home became known as a haven for criminals. Close ties to outlaws. Starr was associated with the notable outlaws like Jesse James and the Dalton brothers. I have them on this list as well, leading to her targeted by law enforcement. Reputation as a female outlaw, Bella was known for her defiance of traditional gender roles and her involvement in outlaw culture. Her flamboyant personality and alliances with male outlaws contributed to her legendary status. And she was shot and killed in 1889, possibly by a former associate. She is remembered as one of the few prominent female outlaws. So John Wesley Hardin, another important figure. Again, you look at these dates, see how they all kind of end at the end of the 19th century. Known as one of the deadliest gunfighters. Again, Mark mentioned John Wesley Hardin. That deadliest gunfighters in the West. Hardin claimed to have killed over 40 men by the time he was 21. He's the one that shot. He was in the hotel and shot a man in the other adjacent room because he was snoring. He was raised in Texas. He became involved in cattle rustling, gambling, and gunfights from a young age. His criminal activities. Hardin's violent reputation began with his alleged killing of an ex-slave at the age of 15. He was involved in numerous gunfights and became notorious for his ruthless efficiency with firearms. He escaped prison multiple times, repeatedly pursued by law enforcement. He was finally captured in 1877 and sentenced to prison for murder, where he spent over 15 years. Reputation as a cold-blooded killer, known for his temper and willingness to kill at the slightest provocation. Hardin's name became synonymous with violence and mayhem. He often justified his actions as self-defense, but he was widely feared. And again, after his release from prison, Hardin briefly attempted to practice law before he was killed in a saloon in El Paso, Texas in 1895. Again, reputation is one of the most violent figures of the Wild West. And then the Dalton Gang. I don't know how many of you guys have ever heard of the Dalton Gang. The Dalton Gang was composed of four brothers, Bob, Grat, Emmett, and Bill Dalton, who initially worked as lawmen but later turned to crime. They became known for their brazen bank and train robberies. The Dalton gang attempted to rob 2 banks simultaneously in Coffeyville in 1892, hoping for a massive payday. However, the townspeople recognized them and engaged them in a gunfight, killing most of the gang members. The Daltons conducted several successful train robberies, but they became greedy, eventually attempting the Coffeyville heist, which led to their demise. The Dalton gang was known for its ambition and willingness to take risks. The Coffeyville bank robbery was a legendary example of their audacity. And then Black Bart, this was the last one, and then we'll move through the document. We'll get back to Mark Gardner here in just a second. Charles E. Boyles, known as Black Bart, was a notorious stagecoach robber in California and Oregon. Dressed as a flour sack mask, he gained fame as a gentleman bandit who left poems at his crime scenes. Very, very interesting. Black Bart committed at least 28 stagecoach robberies between 1875 and 1883 using an unloaded shotgun. He would often give the driver a chance to escape without violence. His poetic calling cards and several robberies, Black Bart left poems behind taunting Wells Fargo, the target of his heists, and adding to his mystique as an educated, nonviolent outlaw. His reputation, Bart was known for his polite demeanor and lack of violence. He was never fired a shot during his robberies. His refined style made him an unusual and intriguing figure in the Wild West. And he was eventually caught in 1883 and served 6 years in prison. His reputation as a gentleman bandit endures, and his poetic style sets him apart from others. Regards to the religious and cultural context of the Wild West, I was kind of interested in this. And there's a significant Catholic presence because of the Spanish heritage of the Southwest. So Protestant and Catholic missions made their way to the West. There's obviously a Mormon influence in Utah, not as significant, but there were people coming, especially the circuit riders that sort of catalyzed some of these tent revivals and calling people to repentance and communal worship and stuff like that. That's what I found. And then diverse religious practices and cultural fusion. Of course, you already had Native American spirituality at the time, where there was intense syncretism, especially amongst the Cowboys and many of these cattle herders between Spanish, sort of European American and Native American cultures. And then folk beliefs. Many settlers brought folk beliefs, including superstitions, healing practices, and herbal remedies, which influenced their daily lives. Cultural life, as I said, it's rugged individualism and self-reliance, diverse populations and mixing. You have Chinese, Mexicans, African Americans, and then various European immigrants, all in the same area, vying for land, vying for money, vying for opportunities. And then outlaws and historical figures. These kind of the three cultural significant points that I had of the Wild West and the impact of the Wild West on the American psyche. I kind of presented this stuff in the opening, my opening monologue, but Manifest Destiny, the expansionist mentality, the rugged individualism and the frontier spirit, conflict and romanticism, and then the cultural syncretism and American diversity. All this is why the Wild West and the West in general still plays such a prominent role in the American psyche. Because as I said, it symbolizes somebody who is self-reliant, somebody who seeks freedom and liberty, somebody who determines their own destiny, somebody who's going to sort of face whatever comes, face the extraordinary resistance of nature and other peoples to sort of manifest that which you believe is rightfully yours. And that really does characterize modern American entrepreneurial spirit and why we celebrate entrepreneurs, I would argue. Major threats faced by westward travelers, obviously disease. I found some of the most prominent diseases for some of these Western settlers was cholera, dysentery, typhoid fever, smallpox, and scurvy were the most common. And how people dealt with these diseases, often isolation and quarantine. They got various herbal remedies and folk medicine from Native Americans, boiling water and food safety. Eventually, they figured about dysentery is that you need to boil all the water you get from these stagnant places, these water sources. And then adaptation to native remedies. Like I said, Native American medicine greatly influenced how they dealt with diseases in the Southwest. And then food shortages, challenges, of course, limited supplies, lack of game and foraging difficulties, spoilage, those types of things, how people dealt with food shortages, hunting and fishing, trading with Native Americans and forts, food rationing, and creative cooking. Pioneers made do with what they had, finding ways to stretch their resources. For example, flapjacks made from flour and water provided a basic bread substitute. And then conflicts with Native Americans, of course, environmental hazards, how people overcame them. And so, again, this whole document, guys, will be available at my website. It's for $5 a month. And so if you want to read all this whole document in more detail, feel free. That's what it's there for. It's just a $5 a month subscription. And if you just use this link right here, you can get access to all these show notes that I've already done, including the last like 8. So that link is right there. Anyways, let's get through here. So I put together a timeline from the beginning with the Louisiana Purchase. So this is all the exploration of moving west in America. So you get the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, Lewis and Clark Expedition, 1804 to 1806, the Missouri Compromise, Indian Removal Act, Texas Revolution, and then the Oregon Trail. Is where you get the Donner Party and stuff like that, as we mentioned earlier. And then we get the Manifest Destiny and Western settlement. That's where I said you could say the West begins in the 1840s, although I really like the mass movement post-Civil War, but you could certainly say it began in the 1840s and make a very convincing argument. So the Manifest Destiny, coined by journalist John L. Sullivan, coined the term, promoting the belief that Americans were divinely destined to expand across the continent. This ideologically fueled expansionist policies and immigration. As I said, part of the American experiment, the American project, I'm talking about all the way back to, like Roanoke, like the early colonies before America, before the Revolution. This land was perceived by especially the British as the opportunity to fulfill and create the second Eden. It was going to be a sort of the millennial kingdom. That was the belief that this land was going, and that's still, you can see how that would influence the Manifest Destiny and Americans believing that, there's only opportunity and positive benefits despite the struggles if we move westward. It still colors the American psyche today. 1845, the annexation of Texas, as we mentioned earlier. 1846, 1848, the Mexican-American War, California Gold Rush, Fort Laramie Treaty, and then the Colorado Gold Rush, 1859. Here's where it really starts to take off. 1861, 1865, the American Civil War. Then 1862, the Homestead Act. It allowed settlers to claim up to 160 acres of land for a small fee, provided they improved the land by building a home and farming it. This act brought millions of settlers to the West. And again, that Homestead Act, I thought, how cool would it have been, right, to go to Colorado or Arizona or parts of California, Montana, wherever, and kind of find and set up shop, find your ideal 160 acres, build your house, plant some crops, and by law, it's yours. Obviously, Native Americans didn't find that too exciting, but I think for us Americans, it would have been. And then you get the Pacific Railroad Act, 1862. This was huge in regards to the transmission of goods out to the West Coast. You have the Sand Creek Massacre in 1864, the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad by 1869, the Battle of Little Bighorns, 1876, just to give you a sort of time period here. And then this is where the iconic Wild West period is. So it's 1877 through 1890. You get the Nez Perce War, gunfight at the OK Corrals, 1881 in Tombstone, Arizona. 1886, the end of the open range. The Dawes Act, 1887. The Dawes Act aimed to assimilate Native Americans by breaking up reservations and allotting individual plots of land, ultimately stripping tribes of communal lands and traditional lifestyles. You have the Oklahoma Land Rush in 1889. And then 1890, the Battle of Wounded Knee. Now, just look at these dates. Isn't it amazing how recent all this stuff is? Like, I love history. And to me, I'm blown away by my research here into the Wild West and how recent it is. I mean, our country is only about 250 years old. Like 2026 is going to be 250 years. We are just a blimp on the historical timeline. And to think of all the interesting stuff that's occurred in this country since then, I think it's fascinating. And by the 1890, we're seeing the closing of the frontier. And so 1890, the census declares the end of the frontier. The U.S. Census Bureau declared that the American frontier was effectively closed as settlements had spread across the continent. This announcement symbolized the end of the unbroken Western wilderness. Turner's frontier thesis, historian Frederick Jackson Turner presented the frontier thesis, asserting that the frontier experience had been central to shaping American democracy, individualism, and the national identity. You get the Reclamation Act in 1902. Oklahoma becomes a state in 1907, and Arizona and New Mexico become states in 1912. Like I know about how recent Hawaii became a state, but isn't it fascinating that the continental United States wasn't even complete until 1912? And so I have a whole section here on the importance of railroads and how that influenced the West and shaping it. Clothing, this was a section I put together that I found was pretty interesting, and looking at the clothing. So shirts, materials, and design. Cowboys and other typically wore long sleeve shirts made from durable materials such as cotton, wool, and flannel. That's why I got the flannel on today. The flannel and the denim, right? This is Americana Western attire here. I don't have the cowboy hat and I don't have the spurs and boots, but I do have the denim and the flannel. And these shirts protected their skin from the sun, wind, and elements while allowing for breathability in the hot, dry climate. Plaid and striped patterns were popular, and some shirts featured reinforced shoulder seams to add durability, all that different stuff. Trousers and denim jeans, contrary to some myth, denim was indeed worn by cowboys, but primarily towards the end of the 19th century. Levi Strauss, German immigrant, his jeans really got going in 1873. Chaps, obviously we know they wore chaps. Hats, they had wide-brimmed hats. Hats were essential for protection from the sun, wind, and rain early on. Many cowboys wore bowler hats, which I was not aware of because of how durable they were. The bowler hat was popular in the West before the classic cowboy hat took hold. And then we have the Stetson. This is the classic cowboy hat. In 1865, John B. Stetson created the Boss of the Plains hat, which became the standard cowboy hat. It featured a high crown and wide flat brim, providing excellent protection from the elements. Stetson hats became highly popular due to their durability, practicality, and adaptability. Footwear, cowboy boots, obviously spurs, vests and coats. So they were very common. Vests were widely worn and were valued for their pockets, which were useful for carrying small tools, money, and tobacco. They provided a layer of warmth without restricting movement, while making them popular among ranchers and cowboys. Duster coats, wool coats, and ponchos. Bandanas and neckerchiefs, popular, and they were highly practical and multifunctional. Cowboys wore them around their necks to protect against dust and sunburn, and they could be pulled off over the face during dusty conditions during cattle drives. Accessories and tools, belts and holsters, obviously. Pocket watch, it's a real thing. Pocket watch were very common accessories for cowboys and settlers who needed to track of time during these long cattle drives. The watch was typically kept in a vest pocket and secured with a chain. Clothing adapted from other cultures, again, Mexican, Native American, and immigrant influences. And then my last section, which we're not going to cover, you can read all this at the website if you want. Native American counters, again, how they really were trading and bartering to begin with. And then the tensions began to escalate with broken treaties and moving on to native lands. And I just have a list of some of the important battles and stuff like that. So that kind of does my document, guys. That is the overview. Again, it's 19 pages. I put it together. I titled it The Real Wild West. So again, that'll be available up at the website if you guys want to check that out. Now, for the rest of the stream, I want to listen to that conversation by historian Mark Gardner and getting a little bit more in depth to some of the topics we've discussed today and presented. So let me pull that up real quick. And so again, as I said, this was a very typical depiction. So you get the wide brimmed hat, you kind of see the Stetson like hat, the saddle, the chaps, the denim, the long shirt, the bandana, handkerchief, very iconic to what a cowboy would have looked like. Now, I want to move to this conversation here, and we're going to watch the rest of this. There's an interesting section on land deeds. If you want to hear, I mean, do you guys, let me know in the chat, do you guys want to hear about like the Homestead Act and stuff like that? He talks a little bit about that. I was going to begin it with where he's getting into Tombstone and talking about the OK Corral and some of the outlaws and stuff like that. But you guys can let me know if you want me to start it from an earlier point. Up to you guys. You let me know. Let me check if any more super chats came in. Nothing over on the Dono chat. Doesn't look like anything on YouTube. Guys, if you want to support my work and my research, feel free to send in a super chat, a question or comment. It did take quite a bit of research to put that document together. I do appreciate anybody who wants to support my work. So thank you for everybody who already has. We have a goal of 20 super chats for the stream. We've got 6 so far. And how that stuff worked. And then I can skip forward certain sections.
But anyway, you mentioned earlier.
Let me slow it down. I'll do 1.25.
This is always something I'm so interested in regards to the frontier in the Wild West. You mentioned earlier about the tax, town or whatever, and the deeds for land. How was land distributed? Because people could just migrate west. Did they just say, hey, this is my land now, I'm going to take it? Or was there sort of a legal process to that?
Well, there's a legal process. You could purchase the land from someone else. But also, the Homestead Act, and isn't that what, 1862? Is that the year of that?
Sure.
You could come out and claim 160 acres, but you had to improve. You had to build a certain size building. You had to plant a crop, and then you had to get witnesses that said, "Oh yes, we saw this building," or whatever. In some instances, and these are the more unusual ones. In New Mexico, there were several Spanish land grants, and through some finagling, some legal means, some maybe not so legal, Euro Americans or Anglos are able to secure these land grants. So one of the most famous one is the Maxwell land grant, which was thousands and thousands of acres. And Lucian Maxwell was able to acquire that from the Hispanic descendants of the grant owners, because he married into them, and then he bought the other sibling shares and amassed this huge tract of land. So once the Maxwell land grant is in Lucian Maxwell's hands, and he can sell it however he wants. I mean, he ended up selling it to this English consortium, whatever you want to call it. And then they sold sections, tried to develop mines and what have you. And you have the Maxwell land grant war with settlers, and it gets very complicated. But essentially, there's all these different ways of acquiring land. So you can either homestead federal land, you can acquire land from a previous owner, but again, it has to be recorded, surveyed, and then surveying was a big occupation in the American West, because in order to document your land, you've got to have township and range. It all has to be recorded where your boundary lines are and whatnot. So, but once you own the land, again, those purchases, whether it's a homestead or you're given it or whatever, it has to be recorded at the county courthouse in the deed books, in the record books. So it was a whole process.
But how is that enforced? Because this is still sort of the frontier. What's to stop someone from just going and killing a family and saying, this is my house now?
Well, you see this happening. A better example for me is not necessarily, taking farmland, but it's in the gold rush and they call it jumping a claim, right? So you would go in and you could pull up this guy's stakes, and all of a sudden you're there. And if you got more guns and buddies, it's like, nope, this is my claim now. And, so that did happen. There was lots of disputes in the town of Tombstone, where people would try to jump some guy's claim. He'd even have a house there, and somebody else would try to, go and record it as theirs. And in fact, there was one incident where this one man and several of his friends attempted to actually move the house off of the land while the guy was gone. And they didn't get it completely done. But yeah, shady stuff like that did happen. And also people were murdered, especially with these, gold rush claims. And this might be before there was, the closest recorder or wherever you could record your claim was a long distance away. And if somebody thought, hey, I like his claim better, and you're a murderer, yeah, they would kill him, and then they would go put their stakes there, and this is mine now. So yeah, but it's called claim jumping.
Seems like a very dangerous life out there, not just because of the elements, but they call it the Wild West for a reason.
Well, that's why in certain instances we had these vigilante groups. that try to keep this in check.
So you had Wild West Batmans pretty much.
Yes, exactly. You had vigilantes, especially there were some famous ones. Whether it was in the gold rush, and also you had vigilantes in the cattle industry. There was a lot of cattle rustling going on. I mean, it's cattle were worth quite a bit of money, and so yeah, I mean, they might take it in their own hands, and they catch the guy changing a brand on a cow, and it's like, okay, we're going to hang them, and they were their own law. Because the problem often was that the law could be one far away. I mean, if you have to go to a county seat or something, but also the law wasn't always delivering justice equally. A sheriff might have been in cahoots with the rustlers, and that's why Wyatt Earp goes off on his vendetta ride after his brother Morgan is assassinated and Virgil is wounded by an assassin. He saw that whenever the cowboy gang did something like that, when they were taken to court, well, they just had their buddies come in and prove alibi. Oh no, Ike Clanton was over here with me at that. He couldn't have done it. And Wyatt Earp got tired of that. It's like, I'm not going to have any more alibis here. We're going to go kill the guys that killed my family and my brother. So you have that kind of vigilante justice as well.
Wow, that is so cool. I guess that sort of speaks to the humans are inevitably good-natured. I guess there's some bad apples out there, but the fact that it all turned out okay and you have vigilantes, I guess, fighting the good fight, albeit a little barbarically, speaks to the good nature of humans, I guess. Because it just seems so easy to, because you have law and order and you have these sheriffs in these small towns, but out in the open frontier where people are setting up their homes and driving cattle and they're striking gold maybe. I mean, it just seems so easy to, I mean, it sounds dark, but just to kill them and just take all their stuff.
Well, that's exactly why in some of these boom towns we talked about, whether it's Wichita and Dodge City, that's why they hired really rough men like Wyatt Earp, Bat Masterson, those guys, Wild Bill Hickok. Sometimes they were as hardened as the criminals that they were arresting. But the thing is that they were so thankful to have these individuals to keep the law and order. I mean, otherwise, in Dodge City and both Wichita, they had city ordinances that outlawed the carrying of firearms in town because they'd have these cowboys come in and they're shooting off guns and people are, it's dangerous.
I'm going to skip this section because we already kind of talked about the gun control laws and some of the rules of the city. So now I'm going to move it to where they start getting into Tombstone and some of the real legends of the Wild West. This is what I loved about Mark Gardner is that I love the way he kind of describes it and his detailed understanding of all these different movers and shakers. So we're going to skip that section. We already know that these various cities, you had to check your guns, that people weren't, there weren't roaming bandits with Winchesters and revolvers that were killing people in the streets and dueling. Not exactly the case. But anyways, let's skip forward here.
Interesting. All right. Well, we've been dancing around it long enough. I mean, sort of probably the most infamous story to come out of the Wild West was this town of Tombstone and Wyatt Earp. So what is the story of Tombstone, the shooting at the OK Corral, and why is it so famous?
Well, I think part of the reason it's famous is that it does involve Wyatt Earp, who became a legendary lawman. And we know so much more about Wyatt Earp now than they did 100 years ago or whatever. But so much more. I mean, but anyway, why it's famous. It did capture the public's imagination, I should say, in later years. When the gunfight took place, and the gunfight's basically between these two factions. You've got the Earp brothers, who, Virgil Earp is the city marshal, and he deputizes, Wyatt and Morgan and Doc Holliday to help him. He has to go disarm the Cowboys, who were kind of flaunting themselves, and Ike Clanton was, he was drunk and he was threatening everybody. And this cowboy gang, which Ike Clanton was a member of, and also the McClarys, they had made threats against the Earps for quite a while. And again, it had to do with these posses that were going after the stage robbers and various other things that caused disagreements, caused people that were disgruntled or whatever. And it just came to a head in Tombstone, October 26th, 1881. And as they went to disarm the Cowboys, they went around the corner. There's this very small lot, maybe 15 to 20 feet wide, and everybody went for their guns. I mean, Virgil Earp said, we come to disarm you, and automatically they're grabbing guns. And Virgil Earp, raises a cane. It was Doc Holliday's case. Hold, I don't want that. But it was too late. I mean, the gunfire erupts almost instantly. But to get back to what I was trying to say earlier, it wasn't this famous thing to start with. I mean, the New York Times had like 3 lines about it, and it had everything was mixed up in the New York Times reporting, it really didn't get much notice. But over time, especially afterwards, as Wyatt Earp goes on this vendetta ride and is trying to track down. And by the way, Wyatt Earp at that time, we called it a vendetta ride, but he was a U.S. deputy marshal himself. So he was a lawman, and he could deputize others, which he did. So all these men were part of a legal posse, and there was more than one posse because there was also a posse chasing Wyatt Earp as well because of the killing that he was doing. But that vendetta ride, I think, is what kind of starts this interest and starts to get some attention. And he gets a lot more play in the newspapers as time goes on. And it just kind of represents, I don't know, it represents the wildness of the Wild West. I mean, you have people settling things through a 6-gun. So, yes, it becomes iconic. But what really takes off this story, and I guess we could call it a legend, is a 1931 biography of Wyatt Earp by Stuart Lake called Frontier Marshal. And it's a very glowing account of Wyatt Earp and the episodes, the events of his life, and what leads up to, and of course, an account of the OK Corral. And you've got this really colorful character named Doc Holliday, who is Wyatt Earp's best buddy at this time. And it's just the stuff of romance and legend, really. And that book spawns movies. It spawns a TV show, Wyatt Earp. It was very popular in the late 1950s. I think Hugh O'Brien was the guy that played Wyatt Earp. So, it took, as with many things, it took a book to create this wide interest. The same thing happened with Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was not a hugely known Western figure, until a book in 1926 called The Saga of Billy the Kid by Walter Noble Burns. It was one of the earliest Book of the Month Club selections, and it spawned a movie in 1930. And there's been several movies, of course, about Billy the Kid since. So, so it's very iconic. It's kind of probably the most famous gunfight, and it's really one of the few real gunfights. A lot of gunfights were anything like that. There wasn't a face-off. I mean, a lot of gunfights were shooting people in the back. John Wesley Hardin got a bullet in the back of the head. There's no way he was going to wait. And Billy the Kid shot in a darkened room. That was not a gunfight at all. But this was one of the few incidents where you actually had these gunfighters facing off, quickly drawing their weapons and blasting away at each other.
Yeah, this is where we start busting up some more myths. So you're telling me that these cool standoffs for 30 seconds a minute with cool music, those didn't actually happen?
No, no, they did not. No, I mean, they're trying to kill each other, and so these guys are going to take any advantage they can if they can, take them unawares. There was one incident involving Buckskin Leslie, and I believe it was Billy Claiborne, who was also known as Billy the Kid. And Buckskin Leslie got wind that Billy Claiborne was going to shoot him. And Buckskin Leslie just goes around the back of the building and is kind of waiting near the door for Billy Claiborne to come out. And then he blasts him when he comes out. He murders him. But everybody knew that, hey, Billy Claiborne was threatening Buckskin Leslie, and so he had every right to take him out. But this idea of giving your opponent a chance to kill you, that did not happen. Now that did happen with your duels in 19th century, the pre-Civil War, and the duelists, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Hart Benton, I mean, famous duelists. That you were giving your opponent a fair chance to kill you, but that did not happen in the Wild West. I mean, Pat Garrett said, Pat Garrett got upset about the twisting of the truth of how he killed Billy, and he says, people, this story that I was hiding behind a bed or a couch is completely untrue. But he said, had there been a couch to hide behind, I would have been behind it. Because he said, Billy had sworn that he was going to kill him next time they saw him. So he wasn't going to give Billy the Kid a chance to kill another sheriff. No. So yeah, that is a huge myth. There's this idea of fairness in a gunfight really did not exist. It's like, you wanted to kill your opponent as quickly as possible and escape injury yourself.
Oh man, that's no fun. So gunfights and duels aren't necessarily portrayed accurately in movies.
No, not really.
As we already knew, I want to give a special thank you to Jason Shull, throws in $5, says, thanks, DPH, always thought-provoking content. Thank you very much, brother. That is the goal, is to try to dive into topics, provide some interesting tidbits, insight, informative information. So I really appreciate the support, Jason, everybody else. I hope you guys are liking the stream. This was a topic that I thought was fascinating, so I dove in for a couple of days, and I hope you guys like the stream. Thank you very much, Jason. I saw Jesse say that Dono chat isn't working. Let me check. It looks like it's working all right for me, Jesse. Not sure what you're seeing on your end. I know you said a server error, but got to give a major thank you to Jeremy, who throws in $15 over on the Dono chat. And he says, thanks for the great work, DPH. Thank you very much, Jeremy. I do appreciate that support. Thank you very much. God bless you and yours. And David Atlas throws in 15. Thank you very much, David. He says, thank you for the great stream, DPH. God bless. Well, thank you, David Atlas, for the support. And Mockingbird just sent in one. Thank you so much, or Mockingbird Lane. And he said, been watching too long to have never shown any more thanks than a like. Keep on keeping on, DPH. Well, thank you very much, Mockingbird Lane, for the support. I truly appreciate that. And one just came in over on the Streamlabs. Let me pull that up real quick. Looks like 25, whoever 25 is, thank you very much. 25 throws in 25 and says, wishing DPH and everyone in the chat a magnificent 2025. Begin with preaching the word to the lost. Assalamu alaikum. Well, how about glory to the Holy Trinity, to the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, now and for ages and ages. We'll end with that one. But thank you very much, 25. God bless you, brother. Thank you for the support, and God bless everybody in the chat. Really appreciate you guys a lot. I love you guys for your love and support. And all right, well, let's continue here. Again, if you guys want to show some love for the research and today's stream, feel free to send in something on Streamlabs, Dono Chat, or YouTube. And if you're really feeling generous, feel free to gift some COTEL Crew memberships, as First Person Q did. Thank you very much, First Person Q, for your support. Let's continue on.
Especially the ones with Clint Eastwood. It's good, the bad, and the ugly of those.
Those are the best ones, though.
They are, yeah. They're really fun, yeah. With the music too, yeah.
You've alluded to Wyatt Earp's shady, mysterious, and dark past outside of Tombstone. Can you elaborate a little more?
Gemistus Plethon with the Joe Biden picture. That's hilarious. He says, were there any famous Orthodox Christians in the Wild West? I did not come across any. I'm not saying there were not. This was still a very transitional and pivotal point in American history. Orthodox Christianity really wasn't very dominant. Not very many people. There were, as John Anon highlighted, and the first Orthodox priest was born in the American West, Saint Sebastian of Jackson. And many Serbians actually moved to California for various labor opportunities. But he said that they were baptized on a naval Russian ship, which makes sense. Really, outside of Russia, there wouldn't have been too much of an Orthodox presence in the Wild West. And even then, there wasn't going to be tons of Russians in the U.S. at that point. But maybe there is. So maybe that's something I need. I'll do it. In fact, if somebody wants to sponsor, that'd be even better. I will do a stream dedicated to American Orthodox saints. That would be a really good stream, covering the lives and the work of various Orthodox saints. If anybody wants to sponsor that, I'd greatly appreciate that. But that would be a great stream. And I have not tackled that before. So I'm always trying to find new topics. I hate going over many of the things I've already said and various streams and ideas. So I'm always trying to look for new topics. If you guys have one, please sponsor a stream. I'd be happy to dive into them. So thank you very much, Gemistus Plethon. It's a good question. I'm sorry I don't have tons of information. Yeah, St. Herman seemed to have a bit of that Wild West vibe, more courage than anyone mentioned today. Agreed with that. Absolutely agree with that. So,
a little more on that.
Yeah, he before he went to Kansas, he was arrested as a horse thief in the Indian Territory, and he escaped a federal jail in Arkansas, and he ends up in Illinois in a town of Peoria, which had its fair share of bordellos or brothels. And according to the records, he was arrested as both as essentially the proprietor, as operating a house of ill repute. So he was apparently a pimp in Illinois. And his first, he had several quote.
Jay Hamza, he threw in the super chat. I suppose he says, "Assalamu alaikum" means peace be upon you. I was aware of that. As a former Muslim, I still wish peace upon people this way. Cardis means brother. I did not know what Cardis means. So thank you, Jay Hamza, again for the support. And thank you for clarifying. Really appreciate the support, Jay. God bless you and your family. And appreciate your testimony the other day when we were talking about Islam, about how you converted. So God bless you, Jay. Really appreciate it.
Wives, common law wives. And he was living with a young woman who was a prostitute. So not only was he a pimp, but his woman was a prostitute as well in Peoria.
He's talking about Wyatt Earp, by the way.
And we have the arrest records to show it's Wyatt Earp. There's no question it was Wyatt. And also his brother Morgan was arrested for the same thing or similar crime. And we also know that Virgil Earp was in Peoria for a while as well. And they had grown up in Illinois and Iowa. So there's a reason why Wyatt Earp would end up back in Illinois. And of course, Illinois is very far from that federal jail in Arkansas that he escaped from for stealing a horse or horses. So, and then his quote wives, he had a second wife. This gets so confusing, Jake, because I'm calling it wife. So he had a wife that he legally married in Lamar, Missouri. I believe it was in 1870. She died of certain disease when she was young and had their first child. So she's out of the picture, and that's how he ends up in Indian Territory, gets caught as a horse thief. Well, in Peoria, Illinois, he has a wife or significant other who's a prostitute, but there's no legal documentation they were ever married. When he's in Dodge City, he's no longer with that woman from Peoria.
And just for context, from my research, Peoria, Illinois had tons of brothels. It's actually a hot spot for brothels, just FYI.
Yeah, but he has a new wife, significant other. Her name is Maddie. And the thing is, in these towns, regardless of what their past had been, and Maddie had been a prostitute at one time also, but they have this facade or present this facade of respectability. She's known as Mrs. Earp. And nobody, even today, if somebody says, this is my wife, Katie, you don't ask to see the marriage certificate, right? You just take my word for it. So that's what happened in these towns. So, she's Mrs. Earp and referred to as Mrs. Earp. But they were never legally married. We have no documentation of that. Well, when they get to Tombstone, Wyatt becomes infatuated with the county sheriff's lover, who was a woman named Sadie. And he essentially just stops seeing or having anything to do with Maddie and dumps her. And that's another thing behind this OK Corral gunfight and the animosity. Sheriff Bean, he favored the Cowboys. But then Wyatt kind of takes his woman. And so there's this animosity between Bean, and you probably saw this in the movie Tombstone you watched as well. So anyway, so Wyatt has at least 4 different women in his life. And Maddie, who's living in Tombstone, is Mrs. Earp. She goes to California, and for a short time, Maddie is with Wyatt's parents, but he apparently never sees her again. And Maddie ends up committing suicide a few years later. And she is quoted in the coroner's inquest testimony. Someone knew her, she says, Wyatt Earp ruined my life. She blamed all her troubles on him. I mean, she had no income. She may have gone back to prostitution, but it was some kind of overdose, but they believe it was suicide. And, how much of fault that is of Wyatt, but certainly from her perspective, he was a mean and cruel person and abandoned her for this other woman, who was also, Sadie had also been a prostitute at one time as well.
Wow. So he was quite the playboy himself, Mr. Wyatt.
He was a ladies' man. And so was Sheriff Bean as well, because his wife divorced him because he had gone to the prostitute Sadie, who was working out of a brothel in Prescott, Arizona. So yes, it was a twisted web that they were weaving there amongst the ladies.
That very twisted web. I guess it's an age-old tale of the women getting in between the men and the men fighting over it. But to me, the star of the show of Tombstone was Doc Holliday. I mean, maybe it was just Val Kilmer's charisma, but he was such a smooth operator. He was so cool to watch. What was his story? Because I mean, this is like a dentist.
Yes. Well, there's an unspoken rule. I was told this by somebody, but the rule is that in any kind of OK Corral movie, Doc Holliday steals the show. So in the Kevin Costner Wyatt Earp, Dennis Quaid he's the character that steals the show. In Tombstone, it's Val Kilmer. Well, in the gunfight at the OK Corral with Burt Lancaster and Kirk Douglas is Doc Holliday. He steals the show. I mean, he's the character. Yes, he was trained as a dentist. He actually had a degree in dentistry. He had a partner in Texas, in Dallas, and they entered this fair competition and actually won awards for their dentistry. So in his early 20s, Doc Holliday was an award-winning dentist. But also, it's true, as you saw in the movie, he was stricken with tuberculosis. He was a heavy drinker. Was the drinking because of his illness? Maybe. But from all accounts, when he drank, he was not a pleasant person. He was easily excitable, argumentative, and he would get into gunfights with people when he was drinking. So, but on the other hand, he was a lot like Wyatt Earp, except for the drinking part. Wyatt Earp actually is not known to have been a drinker. We can't say he never drank. You know, I think Stuart Lake tried to make it seem like the biography. He tried to make it seem like Wyatt, you know, was a teetotaler. But no, Wyatt, you know, we don't know that. He certainly, you know, he worked in saloons. He was a card dealer, and he had a partnership in a gambling establishment there in Tombstone. So you're around liquor, so I can't imagine he wouldn't have a drink or two. But anyway, but both men were described as being quiet, you know, reserved, and you know, and in that way, and very respectful. And in that way, Wyatt and Doc were a lot alike. The difference between the two was the drinking. And when Doc drank, he got in trouble. And from one account says the Earp brothers, whenever Doc got out of control, they were always the one kind of pulling him away and trying to, you know, take care of him like a wayward brother, essentially. So, but yeah, Doc Holliday is this just amazing character, and you know, he's from Georgia, and he eventually dies from tuberculosis. I believe it was 1889 in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, and he's penniless. He really has nothing at the end.
Yeah, he really.
I want to give a special thanks to Moldy Apple. Throws in $11. Says testing 1 2 crispy. Thank you so much, Moldy Apple. So, excuse me. Dono chat is working, at least for Moldy Apple. So I'm not sure, Jesse, if maybe it was your VPN or what. But do appreciate the support, Moldy Apple. Thank you so much, brother. God bless you.
He really was a smooth. That's so funny that sort of the unwritten rule of telling the story of Tombstone is Doc Holliday steals the show. I guess I really fell for that trope.
Yeah, well, you know, the thing is that it is fascinating, this friendship between the two. And my book that's coming out a year from now is called Brothers of the Gun, Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and a Reckoning in Tombstone. And it's a dual biography. I still tell both their stories and focus on their friendship. But that started, a lot of people don't know. They know they were friends they know that from the movies. They don't know how it started. But Doc Holliday saved Wyatt's life in Dodge City. Dodge City Wyatt Earp was surrounded by a good number of cowboys who were going to get even with Wyatt. And Doc Holliday, according to the story Wyatt told, Doc saw through the window. He was playing cards inside this saloon, and he saw Wyatt's predicament. And he came out, you know, guns drawn, and got him to back down. And Wyatt got his gun out and arrested him. But Wyatt always said, and he even testified to this because this question came up in the hearing after the OK Corral about their relationship, and he says, Doc Holliday saved my life in Dodge City. I mean, he always said that more than once, that's where our friendship began, because they had met before then. They'd met in Texas. But that one moment of heroism from Doc Holliday, that cemented that bond. And it remained there until Doc died in Glenwood Springs.
That is so cool. I mean, it seems like they're very different. I mean, just from my understanding from the movie, it seems like they're very different characters, but they have this unbreakable bond. Seems like, judging by what you said, Wyatt probably felt like he was indebted to him a little bit.
It could be, yeah. I mean, it could be felt like, you know, I've never had somebody save my life, but you know, you're trying to, you know, put yourself inside their head, and you know, even when they have squabbles or disputes, you probably would always think back, but you know, if I wouldn't be here, if Doc had not come out, you know, so I think you could put up with a lot of problems.
That's very true. Yeah, that's interesting. But we see gangs and posses and this sort of stuff. Is this the first time we see organizations of crime like that, say gangs and organized crime? Does that really spawn in the Wild West?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that question definitively. You know, I haven't studied, you know, well, isn't there a Martin Scorsese film, The Gangs of New York? You know, so, I mean, I'm sure there's organized crime in other.
Great movie, by the way. Great movie. And I love the Daniel Day-Lewis character. Iconic figure.
Parts of the country. But the gangs that we have that spring up in the West seem to be a little more colorful, or at least capture the imagination, because you have the James Younger gang, which the thing about the James Younger gang is that they struck banks really all across the country and were successful for several years. I mean, you know, the James boys and the Youngers were hitting banks in Kentucky, Missouri, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota. I mean, they were all over the place, and it was virtually impossible for you know, railroad detectives, the Pinkertons and others, to get these guys. And the only way they got Jesse was through the assassination. That was, you know, the government had a hand, you know, in colluded with the Ford brothers to get Jesse killed. You know, Missouri had acquired the nickname the Robber State, which is not a nickname you want for your state if you want investors or people to come there. But the other gangs that you have in the West, again, they're very colorful. You have the Wild Bunch, you have Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid. So, you know, certainly there's organized crimes, especially in your larger cities or whatever. But there's something about the West and the fact that, these organized gang members, when they get away, they're getting away on horseback across the plains. If you've got a ring of robbers in New York City or something, they're not galloping away. It's not quite as romantic as these horseback.
That's true. Yeah. Maybe later on they're driving away in a car. I wonder if, like, the Italian mafia, for example, took any inspiration from Wild West gangs. I feel like we see sort of the same tactics with the shootouts and stuff like that, albeit in different geographical areas and environments.
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask an Italian historian about that. I do think the thing that's about the Western robbers, the things they're doing are so outlandish and spectacular for their time. We've become accustomed through movies and television to see a train robber. I mean, I've been in amusement parks when I was a kid where you ride a train and the robbery was part of the ride. I mean, and it was, it's iconic. But, at the time, for somebody to stop a train and to board it and rob it, that was an incredible event and very sensational. I mean, it just, when Jesse and Frank and the Youngers robbed trains, it made the newspapers, and there were all kinds of eyewitness accounts, and people were terrified. And in some ways, the newspapers even admired those exploits, especially if no one was hurt. In fact, there was a very famous robbery in Missouri in 1876 at Rocky Cut outside of Sedalia, Missouri, and one of the newspapers wrote, and no one was hurt except the express companies, and the express companies were the ones transporting the money. And it's like, it's okay because it was all good and fun. Only the express companies; those guys got plenty of money anyway, and so it's just a bunch of excitement or whatever. And after the Northfield raid, and 2 citizens in Northfield were killed by the gang members, and even the Minnesota Press was writing kind of admiringly of how the gang was eluding all these. There were 1,000 men in the field looking for these guys, and they couldn't help but admire how they were getting away. So yes, it captured the imagination more than you might say your typical criminal pickpocket in Boston or whatever.
That's so funny. That's always one of my favorite tropes in movies and sort of crime movies, when the lawman or the investigator have a level of admiration for the criminals just because they're so smart and so calculated. I love watching that dynamic play out. But the Wild West, sort of when we picture the Wild West, we think of the plains and these desert landscapes, but there's also these mountain men. And I have this book that my uncle's been begging me to read for the longest time, called The Crow Killer, about Jeremiah Johnson. So who are mountain men, and what's sort of their story and these characters like Jeremiah Johnson?
Before we get into the mountain men, I want to give a very special thank you to Jay Hamza. Thank you so much, brother, for the generous support today. Jay just gifted 5 COTEL Crew memberships to the chat. Welcome, Jelani. Soon Kim got 1, C-Guy 33, T-Rod, and Candyman Petrick. So thank you so much, Jay, and I'm sure the chat truly appreciates that. God bless you, brother. Thank you very much for your support, man. I really do appreciate it.
So the mountain men are fur traders. Let me take that back. They're mostly, the iconic mountain men are fur trappers. So what was initially happening in the early fur trade in the American West is that you had traders who were acquiring peltries from American Indians. Well, in the early 1820s, I can't think of his name now. In the early 1820s, an entrepreneur in St. Louis decided, why don't we send out a bunch of our own men to actually trap ourselves? And that's what happened. They went in, up the streams towards the mountains, and these individuals trapped beaver, because the fur felt from beaver was used in making hats. And so your typical mountain man was a beaver trapper. But some of these mountain men also, had careers as Indian traders. For example, on the Arkansas River in Colorado was a place called Bent's Fort. That was a fur trading post. They employed former mountain men to go out to various Indian camps or villages to trade for buffalo robes and other peltries. And the reason they employed them is a lot of these mountain men spending time in the mountains or in the American West, some of them married Indian wives, and they learned to speak Crow. They learned to speak Lakota. They learned to speak Cheyenne. So this trading post hired men with these skills and sent them out with goods. And, a lot of times it was easier to send traders out to the camps where the buffalo are being hunted. They didn't want to, you don't want to take your workers, which is the Indian hunters. You don't want to take the hunters away from where they're hunting. You want them to keep killing buffalo and tanning robes. So you send your traders out to these hunting camps where they can barter get the robes and bring the bows back to the fort to be packed and then shipped up the Santa Fe Trail. So you have mountain men, they start out as fur trappers, beaver trappers. Some of them, as they get older, as time goes on, they graduate to being fur traders or Indian traders. But your classic mountain man is a trapper, and he's carries his own beaver traps, hand forged, and is trapping the streams. That's who that's what you conjure up with Jeremiah Johnson and that story. And they were different nationalities, by the way. One of the more famous mountain men was African American, and his name was Jim Beckworth. And he had a white father and enslaved woman as his mother, but he eventually was given his freedom. And he sought his opportunity to the West, became a trapper. He eventually became a leader of the Crow tribe and fought their battles with them. Yes, he did. He's a fascinating character. I mean, if you like Crow Killer, you should get a biography of Jim Beckworth. And he was also involved in the gold rush. He had a store in California. Beckworth Pass in California is named for Jim Beckworth. He had one of the very early biographies of a frontier figure was published about him, and it's the life of Jim Beckworth, and it came out in the 1850s. He was still alive. He had a very eventful career. He ended up becoming an Army Scout and going after various Plains groups. He was at Sand Creek at the Sand Creek Massacre with the military. His name was Jim or James Beckworth.
This may be a difficult question, but what are your top 3 favorite Westerns or movies related to the Wild West, and why?
Okay, that is a tough one. Definitely in my top 3 is The Searchers, directed by John Ford and starring John Wayne. After that, I do really like The Outlaw, Josie Wells, which is kind of and it's kind of a combination Civil War and Western, right? It's kind of, you could call it a Civil War movie because he's a rebel, a bushwhacker or whatever. And then another one that I really like, and again, it's one of these. It may be more Civil War than Western. It's Ride with the Devil, directed by Ang Lee, and it stars Tobey Maguire, and actually the singer Jewel is also in it. This is many years old, but it has a wonderful soundtrack, and it's the story of the fighting in Missouri during the Civil War, and it portrays it so well because it really was more about revenge. And Jesse James was all about revenge, and the war was very personal for these fighters in Missouri, the bushwhackers and the Redlegs, but it has a Western component at the end, which is kind of neat. So I guess and I would add one more. I know you asked for 3, but I also really like the Sam Peckinpah film Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid. Came out in the early 70s. That one has an unusual character actor, or at least playing a character role. It has Bob Dylan.
Really?
In the film. Yeah, Bob Dylan. And then the Billy the Kid is played by Chris Christopherson, who just died recently.
Yeah, wow, that's interesting. There's a Bob Dylan biopic coming out in a couple weeks.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that doesn't look too bad. But also, Pat Garrett is played by James Coburn, and I think he is the best Pat Garrett of any of the Billy the Kid movies. And so anyway, I would say I would pick 4. I would do Pat Garrett, Billy the Kid, Ride with the Devil, Outlaw, Josie Wells, and then The Searchers.
Have you ever seen? These don't really take place in the Wild West, I don't think, but I've never seen any of them. What do you think of the Dirty?
Love Josie Wales. Huge fan of that movie. I remember watching that with my dad as a little kid, and always colored my perception when I played with friends, Cowboys and Indians. Yeah, Clint Eastwood, classic.
Dirty Harry movies with Clint Eastwood.
Oh, I love the Dirty Harry movies. Yeah, I love those. Those are great. Those are classics.
Yeah, I would have to say, I mean, if I could cheat, I would put the Dollars trilogy in my top 3 somewhere. But if I had to pick one, I think for a few dollars more, the second one is the best one. I think those 3 movies have the best score of all time. I love those movies. But I'd have to put the Outlaw Josie Wales in there for sure. And I also think it's newer, but I thought Django was so good. I mean, maybe it's just because I'm young and I haven't seen as many Westerns as you have. But those are definitely really good. Would you say that the American Westerns are better or the spaghetti Westerns?
I think the American Westerns are better. And this is not really, I mean, I like Westerns that are filmed in the West and not Spain or Italy or whatever. But I mean, they're still good. But another Western I thought I really liked was The Hateful Eight, which is also.
The Hateful Eight was so good. Tarantino.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I went and saw it in the Panavision screen or whatever. He filmed that larger format. And there were only certain theaters in the country that could do it that had the projectors. And I went to Denver, which is an hour and a half away, to see it in that format. He shot on real film, wasn't digital. And no, I liked that a lot. And there were just so many funny scenes in that too. Well, that's the other thing too about his films is that mixture of humor in there, along with the violence and the drama. I mean, so that's I like that.
Yeah, Tarantino blends violence and humor.
So, anyways, it's kind of a random conversation from here. It's only like 7 more minutes. So, I'm going to share this link. If you guys want to watch the full interview here, feel free. But, anyways, that's going to pretty much wrap up today's stream, guys. I really thank everybody who helped me try to reach my goal today, everybody who contributed. Major thank you to Jay Hamza. What do you guys think? I mean, was this a good topic? This was kind of off the cuff. I know it's not my usual theology and philosophy topics, but this was a fun little historical period for me to dive into and create a stream for. And I learned a lot doing my document, putting my document together. Again, for anybody who wants to read that, it'll be available at the website for $5 a month members. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Let me know what you guys think in the chat. Yeah, First Person Q says I was very entertained. Well, glad. Thank you, First Person Q, again for gifting the memberships, but I'm glad. Jesse said, I love your historical stream. Well, thank you very much. I enjoy doing these. I think it's fun, and you guys can give me more topics, like to dive into some type of historical period. Again, this one is kind of something that I haven't even addressed on this YouTube channel before, but something that I thought was going to be really, really fun. Oh, it says check Jesse's super chat. Crispy just said, let me see. Where's it at? Is it on Dono? Where's the super chat, Jesse? I don't see it. I thought Jesse wasn't able to Dono chat. Okay. Well, I'm refreshing. I'm sorry, Jesse, it hadn't come through yet. I don't see it. I'm refreshing Dono chat, but last one I see is Moldy Apple on my end. So I'm not sure, brother. Maybe it didn't go through. Usually they come through right away, so I'm not sure. Let me check again. Oh, here we go. BJ Ryan throws in $20 over on the Dono chat, says, keep up the good work, DPH. Thank you so much, BJ Ryan. Really appreciate that. And Jesse's did go through. I got it, $10. Jesse, no comment. Thank you so much, Jesse, for the support. And thank you very much, BJ Ryan 69, for the support. I really appreciate that, brothers. Thank you very, very much. And sounds like you guys pretty much like the stream topic. So if you guys have any more, any American history is very interesting, said Dagan McCluskey. Well, thank you. And I'd be open to doing more of these. And I didn't even, this was a very general overview, right? There, again, our Orthodox brother that runs the history at the OK Corral channel, this one right here, he's an Orthodox catechumen. I got an email from him. Shout out to him. Gave him a subscription. So go subscribe to his channel. Now you know that there's an Orthodox brother behind this channel. Tons of good content. And he does deep dives into more specific topics. So this was just a sort of grand overview narrative of the Wild West. And I thought it was fun preparing for. I didn't know how popular or how many people would be interested in the topic. So I'm glad that you guys really enjoyed it. And Ghost throws in $5, says there's a Wild West Orthodoxy story in the book Lost Histories, the Good, the Bad, and the Strange in Early American Orthodoxy. Let me find that. It's the book Lost Histories. Let me see if that's on Amazon. Lost Histories, the Good, the Bad, and the Strange. Oh, nice. Okay. I'll have to check that out. I am not familiar with that book. I've never even heard of it. So thank you, Ghost, for bringing it to my attention. Oh, it is. It says, you've probably heard of the story of Saint Raphael. Oh, hold on. Okay, go back. Saint Raphael and Saint Alexander, liturgical translator Isabella Hapgood, and other righteous men and women who made their mark in the early development of Orthodoxy in America. But what about the notorious itinerant Bulgarian monk or Father Raphael Morgan, the first Black Orthodox priest in America? Wow. Or Vera Johnston, who served the Orthodox Church without renouncing her Theosophist roots. Their stories and many others, some edifying, some appealing, all entertaining, make up the history of the early decades of Orthodox Christianity in the continental United States. Very interesting. Let me show you guys what that looks like. Thank you, Ghost, for bringing that up to my attention. I had never even heard of this book. So you guys can see it actually specifically address early American Orthodoxy. I'm going to buy that book. I have never even heard of it. So thank you so much, Ghost, for bringing that to my attention. That sounds like a really good read. Thank you very much. Yeah, it's about a Bulgarian priest trying to convert the leader of the of the Mormon church. I didn't see that in the description. Very interesting. Well, thank you again, Ghost. Really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for the support today. Truly appreciate that. And let me know if you guys want some more historical streams. Angel G said this was a great stream. Makes me want to play Red Dead right now. I haven't played it, but learning more about it and hearing, I heard one historian also say that there's some historical elements to the video game. I would be open to that. I think is it a first person shooter? I believe it is. Empyrean Francorum says you should do a stream on Napoleonic France. That'd be a good one too. Sounds like a little bit of research, but that sounds like a good topic. Thank you, Imperium, for that suggestion. A Theosophist, did I hear that right? Yes, you did hear that right. It's right here. Or Vera Johnson, who served the Orthodox Church without renouncing her Theosophist roots. Yeah, you did hear that right. So anyways, guys, thank you so much. I appreciate all the support. God bless you all and your families. And I will be back, I hope, with 2 more streams this week. I'm waiting to hear back from a gentleman to see if they want to join me on this one. But this week, we'll be doing Russia Before the Second Coming. And I have a couple other ideas on some streams coming up. So I will see you when I see you. So as always, until next time, God bless.